1. The hidden manual of human nature. Imagine just for a moment that every person you have ever met came with an invisible instruction manual. It wouldn't describe their favorite color or what they enjoy doing on weekends. Instead, it would reveal the quiet patterns hidden beneath every thought, every decision, and every emotion. It would explain why someone instantly trusts one stranger but avoids another. It would reveal why compliments linger in our minds longer than criticism in some moments, yet a single harsh word can overshadow 10 kind ones in others. Most importantly, it would show that beneath our unique personalities, there are surprisingly predictable patterns that almost all human minds share. The fascinating part is that this manual may already exist, not as a single book tucked away in a forgotten library, but scattered across centuries of observation, philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology. Yet most of these insights are never taught in school. We spend years learning mathematics, history, and science, but very little time understanding the operating system of the very mind that experiences all of them. Take a moment to reflect on that idea. Every conversation you have today, every decision you make, every first impression you form, and every opinion you change or refuse to change is quietly influenced by psychological mechanisms operating beneath your conscious awareness. Much like the roots of a great tree hidden beneath the soil, these invisible processes support everything visible above the surface. When people hear the phrase psychology hacks, they often imagine secret tricks for controlling others or winning every argument, but that isn't what this journey is about. The most valuable psychological principles are not spells or shortcuts. They are observations about how the human mind naturally works. They help explain why we behave the way we do, even when we believe we're acting completely rationally. Throughout history, great storytellers, philosophers, military strategists, negotiators, and leaders have understood pieces of this hidden manual. Long before psychology became an academic discipline, they noticed recurring patterns in human nature. They learned that people often fear loss more than they value gain. They noticed that confidence can be contagious, that familiarity creates comfort, and that small acts of kindness often inspire unexpected loyalty. Modern research has given names to many of these patterns, but the patterns themselves have quietly guided human behavior for thousands of years. Perhaps the most intriguing realization is that these principles don't only apply to other people. As we explore them together, you may begin noticing them within yourself. You might recognize moments when your own choices were gently nudged by circumstances you barely noticed. You may discover that what felt like complete independence was, at times, influenced by subtle psychological forces working silently in the background. This isn't meant to make you suspicious of every interaction or doubtful of your own judgment. Quite the opposite, awareness brings clarity. When you understand the invisible currents beneath the surface, you become less likely to drift wherever they happen to carry you. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to notice the quiet pause between influence and choice. Over the course of this journey, we'll explore 30 fascinating principles that reveal just how remarkable and sometimes surprisingly predictable the human mind can be. Some will feel familiar. Others may challenge assumptions you've carried for years. None of them are supernatural, yet together they can feel almost magical because they illuminate behaviors that often seem mysterious until they're understood. As we continue, remember that every hidden pattern begins with a simple truth. Humans are deeply social creatures. We are constantly shaping one another through countless invisible exchanges, often without realizing it. And one of the oldest and most powerful of these exchanges begins with something as simple as giving. In the next chapter, we'll explore why even the smallest favor can create an invisible bond, and why the human mind has such a difficult time leaving kindness unanswered. If you'd like, I can also expand each of the remaining 29 segments to approximately 500 words in the same relaxing, documentary-style voice. 2. The rule of reciprocity. Imagine you're walking through a busy market on a quiet afternoon. As you pass one small shop, the owner smiles warmly and offers you a cup of tea. You weren't planning to stop. You didn't ask for anything. Yet after accepting the drink, something subtle begins to change. You find yourself lingering a little longer, You listen more carefully. Perhaps you even feel slightly more open to buying something before you leave. Nothing dramatic has happened, and no one has forced you into a decision. Instead, an ancient psychological pattern has quietly awakened. This pattern is known as the rule of reciprocity, one of the oldest and most powerful social forces in human history. At its core, reciprocity is remarkably simple. When someone gives us something, whether it is a gift, a favor, a compliment, or even a few moments of genuine attention, we often experience an internal desire to give something back. It feels almost automatic, as though an invisible balance has been disturbed, and our minds gently encourage us to restore it. Take a moment to reflect on the last time someone did something unexpectedly kind for you. Perhaps they held the door open, helped you solve a problem, or remembered something important that you had mentioned weeks before. Did you notice a quiet feeling that made you want to return the kindness? Even if no one expected anything in return, the impulse itself may have appeared almost effortlessly. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency makes perfect sense. Thousands of years ago, human survival depended on cooperation. Individuals who shared food, offered protection, or helped during difficult times increased the chances that others would return the favor when circumstances changed. Communities built on mutual exchange were often stronger and more resilient than those driven only by self-interest. Over generations, the expectation of returning kindness became deeply woven into human behavior. Today, although our world looks very different, the same instinct continues to influence countless interactions. Businesses offer free samples before asking customers to make a purchase. Restaurants sometimes provide complimentary appetizers or desserts. Charities may send small gifts along with donation requests. Even online creators often spend months sharing valuable knowledge without asking for anything in return, knowing that people naturally feel more willing to support those who have already helped them. Of course, this doesn't mean every generous act is part of a carefully designed strategy. Many people give simply because they enjoy helping others. Genuine kindness exists, and it enriches both the giver and the receiver. The interesting part is that our minds often respond in similar ways regardless of the giver's intentions. The psychological mechanism works quietly beneath the surface, whether we recognize it or not. This principle also helps explain why relationships grow stronger through small, consistent acts of generosity. Trust rarely appears overnight. Instead, it is built through countless tiny exchanges that communicate reliability, care, and goodwill. A thoughtful message, a listening ear during a difficult moment, or a simple act of support can gradually create bonds that become remarkably difficult to break. Reciprocity is not only about material gifts. It is equally powerful when expressed through time, attention, and understanding. Yet every psychological principle has another side worth considering. Because reciprocity is so deeply rooted, it can sometimes be used to influence people without their awareness. Skilled marketers, negotiators, and persuasive communicators understand that offering something first often increases the likelihood of receiving cooperation later. The gift may be small, but its psychological impact can be surprisingly large. This doesn't make the principle good or bad. Like many tools, its value depends entirely on how it is used. Recognizing reciprocity doesn't mean becoming suspicious whenever someone offers kindness. Instead, it invites a deeper awareness of the invisible forces that shape everyday interactions. By noticing this quiet impulse, you gain the freedom to decide whether your response comes from genuine appreciation, thoughtful choice, or simply the ancient instinct to settle an unseen social balance. As fascinating as reciprocity is, it represents only one of many invisible currents guiding human behavior. Sometimes, people don't need a gift to influence our feelings at all. Sometimes, simply seeing a person, a place, or an idea again and again is enough to transform unfamiliarity into comfort. In the next chapter, we'll explore why the human mind often mistakes familiarity for trust, and how repetition quietly shapes the world we believe we have chosen for ourselves. 3. The mere exposure effect. Picture yourself walking through a quiet neighborhood you've never visited before. The streets feel unfamiliar, the buildings seem distant, and every face you pass belongs to a stranger. At first, your mind remains alert, carefully observing everything around you. But imagine returning to that same neighborhood every day for the next month. The streets would slowly become recognizable. The once unfamiliar buildings would begin to feel comforting. Even the faces you occasionally pass might seem friendlier, despite never having exchanged a single word. Nothing about the neighborhood has truly changed. The greatest transformation has taken place inside your own mind. This quiet psychological phenomenon is known as the mere exposure effect. It describes our natural tendency to develop a preference for things simply because we encounter them repeatedly. The more often we see a face, hear a song, read a particular phrase, or even walk past a familiar place, the more comfortable it tends to feel. Familiarity has an extraordinary ability to soften uncertainty, gently replacing caution with a sense of ease. Take a moment to reflect on your favorite song. The first time you heard it, it may have seemed ordinary or even forgettable. Yet after listening several more times, something changed. You began noticing details you had overlooked before. The melody became easier to anticipate and the rhythm more satisfying. Eventually, the song felt almost like an old friend. This transformation wasn't necessarily because the music itself had changed, but because your mind had become increasingly familiar with it. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency served an important purpose. For our ancestors, unfamiliar environments often carried hidden dangers. Unknown animals, strange plants, and unfamiliar people could represent real threats. Familiar surroundings, on the other hand, usually meant safety and survival. Over countless generations, the brain developed a simple shortcut. What is familiar is more likely to be safe. Although modern life presents very different challenges, this ancient mental habit continues to influence our perceptions every single day. Advertisers have quietly understood this principle for decades. A company doesn't always expect you to purchase a product the first time you see its logo. Instead, they rely on repetition. The more often their name appears in commercials, on billboards, online videos, or even on the side of a passing bus, the more familiar it becomes. Eventually, when faced with several choices, your mind may naturally lean toward the brand you've seen before, not necessarily because it is better, but because it feels more comfortable. This effect extends far beyond advertising. It quietly shapes friendships, workplaces, neighborhoods, and even romantic relationships. People who see each other regularly, whether in school, at work, or in a local cafe, often become more comfortable over time, even without many conversations. Familiarity lowers psychological barriers. The unknown slowly becomes predictable, and predictability often creates trust. Of course, familiarity does not guarantee wisdom or truth. Simply encountering an idea repeatedly does not make it accurate. In fact, one of the more surprising consequences of the mere exposure effect is that repeated statements can begin to feel believable simply because they are familiar. Our brains often confuse the ease of processing familiar information with evidence that the information must be true. This subtle mental shortcut can shape opinions, reinforce stereotypes, and influence decisions without us ever noticing the process taking place. That realization invites an interesting question. How many of your preferences were consciously chosen, and how many quietly developed through repetition alone? The foods you enjoy, the music you love, the news sources you trust, and even some of your personal beliefs may have been gently influenced by nothing more than repeated exposure over time. This doesn't diminish their value, but it reminds us that familiarity can be a powerful architect of our inner world. Awareness of this principle offers a quiet kind of freedom. Instead of assuming every feeling of comfort reflects careful judgment, we can pause and ask ourselves whether something feels trustworthy because it has earned that trust, or simply because it has become familiar. Sometimes the two are connected. Other times, they are very different things. As the mind grows comfortable with what it repeatedly encounters, another ancient instinct quietly waits beneath the surface. While familiarity draws us toward what we often see, scarcity pulls us toward what we fear we might lose. And in many ways, the things that seem hardest to obtain often become the things we desire the most. For scarcity creates desire. Imagine walking through a quiet bookstore late in the evening. Hundreds of books line the shelves, each waiting patiently to be discovered. Most barely catch your attention as you wander through the aisles. Then, almost hidden in a corner, you notice a small handwritten sign beneath a single book. Last copy available. Suddenly, that one book seems different. You haven't read its description, you know nothing about its author, yet it now feels strangely valuable. The possibility that it might disappear awakens something deep within your mind. This subtle shift is the power of scarcity. One of the oldest psychological tendencies we possess is the instinct to value things that appear limited, rare, or difficult to obtain. Whether it is an object, an opportunity, or even another person's attention, scarcity has an extraordinary ability to transform ordinary things into something that feels precious. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you wanted something more simply because you believed you might lose the chance to have it. Perhaps it was a limited edition item, a concert ticket that was almost sold out, or even a childhood toy that suddenly became impossible to find. The object itself may not have changed at all. What changed was your perception of its value. From an evolutionary perspective, this instinct makes perfect sense. For most of human history, resources were uncertain. Food could become scarce after a harsh winter. Fresh water wasn't always guaranteed. Safe shelter and fertile land were limited. Those who recognized and secured valuable resources before they disappeared were often more likely to survive and pass on their genes. Over thousands of generations, our brains became finely tuned to notice anything that seemed limited in supply. Although modern society has replaced hunting grounds with shopping malls and online marketplaces, the ancient instinct remains remarkably active. Businesses understand this better than almost anyone. Words like limited edition, only 3 left, exclusive access, or offer ends tonight are designed to activate the same psychological system that once helped our ancestors survive. The fear of missing an opportunity often becomes stronger than the actual desire for the item itself. This phenomenon is closely connected to another powerful emotion known as the fear of missing out. When we believe others may gain access to something that we cannot, our minds naturally assign greater importance to it. Suddenly, what was once optional begins to feel essential. We become less focused on whether we truly need something and more focused on avoiding the regret of losing the opportunity forever. Scarcity also shapes the way we think about relationships. Human attention is one of the rarest resources we possess. People who constantly seek approval or make themselves endlessly available are sometimes taken for granted, while those who value their own time often appear more intriguing. This isn't because being distant automatically creates attraction, but because our minds instinctively notice what seems less available. We often appreciate things more when we understand they cannot be obtained without effort or patience. However, scarcity can also cloud our judgment. When we believe time is running out, careful thinking often gives way to emotional decision-making. We rush into purchases, commitments, or choices that we might have approached very differently if no deadline existed. The pressure created by perceived scarcity can make us confuse urgency with importance. In reality, something being rare does not automatically make it valuable. Likewise, something widely available is not necessarily less meaningful. This awareness offers a quiet form of protection. The next time you feel an overwhelming urge to act because something seems limited, pause for just a moment. Ask yourself whether you genuinely desire the opportunity itself or whether your mind is simply responding to the possibility of losing it. That brief moment of reflection can reveal the difference between thoughtful choice and instinctive reaction. Perhaps the most fascinating part of scarcity is that it doesn't always involve objects. Sometimes, what people desire most isn't rare because it is physically limited. Sometimes, its value increases because other people seem to want it as well. Our minds are deeply social, and we often look to those around us when deciding what deserves our attention. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the choices of strangers quietly shape our own, and why the crowd can become one of the most persuasive forces in human psychology. 5. Social proof. Imagine finding yourself in a city you've never visited before. As evening approaches, you're looking for a place to have dinner. 2 restaurants stand side by side on the same quiet street. One is almost empty, with only a couple of tables occupied. The other is alive with conversation, its entrance filled with people patiently waiting for a table. You know nothing about either restaurant. you haven't read any reviews, and no one has recommended one over the other. Yet without realizing it, your attention naturally drifts toward the busier place. Somewhere deep inside, your mind quietly whispers a simple thought: if so many people have chosen it, it must be good. This quiet mental shortcut is known as social proof. It is the tendency to look at the behavior of other people when deciding what we should believe, value, or do ourselves. Rather than carefully analyzing every situation from the beginning, our brains often use the actions of others as a guide, especially when we are uncertain. It is an efficient strategy, one that has helped human beings survive and cooperate for thousands of years. Take a moment to reflect on the last time you chose a movie because it had thousands of positive reviews, visited a cafe because it was crowded, or listened to a song because everyone seemed to be talking about it. In many cases, you probably weren't consciously copying other people. Instead, their choices quietly influenced your own, making one option feel safer or more trustworthy than another. From an evolutionary perspective, this behavior is remarkably sensible. Early humans lived in environments filled with uncertainty. Imagine a group of hunter-gatherers coming across an unfamiliar plant. If everyone else avoided eating it, following the group could mean the difference between life and death. If everyone began running in the same direction, it was usually wiser to run first and ask questions later. Trusting the behavior of others often increased the chances of survival. Even though modern life presents different challenges, our minds continue to rely on this ancient shortcut. Today, instead of watching others gather food, we watch online reviews, bestseller lists, social media trends, and view counts. A video with millions of views appears more credible than one with only a handful, even before we've watched a single second. A product with thousands of glowing reviews feels safer than one with none, despite the possibility that popularity and quality are not always the same thing. This tendency helps explain why trends spread so quickly. Fashion, music, technology, and even language evolve through social influence. Once enough people begin adopting a particular behavior, others often follow, creating a cycle that strengthens itself. Sometimes the crowd is pointing toward something genuinely valuable. Other times, the crowd is simply following another crowd, each person assuming someone else must know the right answer. History offers many examples of both possibilities. Entire societies have embraced remarkable discoveries because enough people recognized their value. At the same time, history also reminds us that crowds can make serious mistakes. Financial bubbles, widespread misinformation, and moments of mass panic often grow stronger because individuals take comfort in believing that so many people cannot possibly be wrong. Yet the size of a crowd has never been a guarantee of truth. This realization invites a gentle question. When you find yourself agreeing with the majority, is it because the evidence convinced you, or because seeing many others agree made the conclusion feel more comfortable? There is no shame in being influenced by others. Social proof is a natural part of being human. The important step is becoming aware of when it is guiding your decisions. Awareness does not mean rejecting popular opinions simply because they are popular. Sometimes the crowd really is pointing in the right direction. Instead, awareness encourages curiosity. It asks us to pause before assuming that popularity equals wisdom or that widespread agreement automatically means something is true. By taking that small pause, we allow ourselves to think more clearly while still appreciating the collective experiences of others. As powerful as social proof can be, it is only one piece of the puzzle. People do not simply follow crowds because they exist. They are also deeply influenced by individuals they genuinely like and trust. Long before facts or logic enter a conversation, our minds often make a quiet emotional decision about the person standing in front of us. In the next chapter, we'll explore why likability can become one of the most persuasive forces of all, and how simple human connection often shapes decisions more than reason itself. 6. The liking principle. Imagine attending a gathering where you know almost no one. As conversations begin, you notice two strangers approach you. The first speaks politely but seems distant, asking only a few brief questions before turning away. The second smiles warmly, remembers your name almost immediately, laughs at your jokes, and mentions that they share some of your interests. Perhaps they enjoy the same books, grew up in a similar town, or have traveled to places you've always wanted to visit. Before long, you find yourself feeling more comfortable around the second person. You trust them a little more, enjoy the conversation a little more, and if they were to offer advice or make a suggestion, you might be surprisingly willing to listen. This quiet tendency is known as the liking principle. It is one of the simplest yet most powerful forces in psychology. We are naturally more open to the ideas, requests, and opinions of people we genuinely like. Long before we evaluate facts or carefully analyze arguments, our emotions often make an invisible decision about the person presenting them. Once that emotional connection is formed, everything they say may seem just a little more convincing. Take a moment to reflect on someone whose advice you deeply value. It could be a close friend, a family member, a teacher, or perhaps someone you admire from afar. Now ask yourself why their words carry so much weight. Is it purely because they are always correct, or is it because your positive feelings toward them make their perspective easier to accept? More often than we realize, affection quietly opens doors that logic alone cannot. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Early humans depended heavily on cooperation within small groups. Trusting familiar companions increased the chances of survival. Those who built strong relationships could hunt together, share resources, care for children, and protect one another from danger. Over thousands of generations, our brains learned to associate warmth, familiarity, and friendliness with safety. Even today, those ancient instincts continue to shape our interactions, although the threats we face are far different from those of our ancestors. One of the strongest foundations of liking is similarity. We naturally feel drawn to people who remind us of ourselves. Shared hobbies, common experiences, similar beliefs, or even small coincidences can create an immediate sense of connection. Have you ever discovered that someone grew up in the same hometown or enjoys the same favorite film? Suddenly, the conversation feels easier, almost as though an invisible bridge has formed between you. The similarity itself may be minor, but its emotional impact can be surprisingly powerful. Compliments also play an important role. Genuine appreciation has a remarkable ability to strengthen relationships. When someone notices our efforts, recognizes our strengths, or expresses sincere admiration, we often respond with warmth in return. Of course, there is an important distinction between authentic kindness and empty flattery. Most people eventually recognize when praise is exaggerated or manipulative. Sincere appreciation builds trust because it feels earned, while insincere compliments often create quiet skepticism. The liking principle is visible almost everywhere in modern life. Advertisements frequently feature celebrities, athletes, or actors not because they are experts on every product they promote, but because positive feelings toward a familiar face often transfer to the product itself. Sales professionals invest time building rapport before discussing business because they understand that people are more comfortable saying yes to someone they enjoy talking with. Even successful leaders often inspire loyalty not only through competence, but through their ability to make others feel valued and understood. Yet this principle also reminds us to think carefully. Someone being kind, charming, or similar to us does not automatically mean they are correct. A friendly smile can make poor advice seem wise. A shared interest can make us overlook important differences in judgment or character. Our emotions naturally encourage trust, but trust should still be balanced with thoughtful reflection. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within the liking principle is not about becoming more persuasive, but about becoming more human. Genuine curiosity, empathy, and respect create connections that no clever technique can replace. People remember how they were made to feel far longer than they remember the exact words that were spoken. In a world where many interactions are brief and distracted, simply listening with kindness can become one of the most meaningful forms of influence. As powerful as personal connection can be, there is another force that often carries even greater weight. Sometimes, people don't follow an idea because they like the person presenting it. Sometimes they follow because that person appears to possess knowledge, experience, or authority. In the next chapter, we'll explore why titles, uniforms, and expertise can quietly shape our decisions, often before a single word has even been spoken. 7. The power of authority. Imagine that you are walking through a busy airport, unsure of which direction to go. Several people are offering advice, each pointing toward a different terminal. One person is dressed casually, another wears a bright security uniform, and a third carries a pilot's badge. Even before anyone begins to explain, your mind is already making quiet assumptions. Without realizing it, you are more likely to trust the individual whose appearance suggests experience and responsibility. Their clothing, posture, and symbols of authority speak before their words ever do. This is the psychological power of authority. Human beings have a natural tendency to place greater trust in people who appear knowledgeable, experienced, or officially recognized. It is a mental shortcut that allows us to make decisions quickly in a world filled with uncertainty. Most of the time, this shortcut serves us well. We trust doctors to understand medicine, engineers to build safe bridges, and experienced pilots to navigate aircraft. Society depends on a certain level of confidence in those who have developed expertise through years of learning and practice. Take a moment to reflect on how often you follow instructions simply because of who is giving them. Perhaps you've accepted advice from a teacher without questioning it, followed directions from a police officer without hesitation, or believed a news report because it came from a respected presenter. In many situations, trusting authority is not only reasonable but necessary. No one can become an expert in every field, so we naturally rely on the knowledge of others. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency also has deep roots. Early human communities often depended on experienced leaders who understood migration routes, hunting techniques, or seasonal changes. Following those with greater knowledge increased the group's chances of survival. Questioning every decision during moments of danger could waste precious time. As a result, our brains gradually developed a tendency to respect signals of competence and leadership. However, authority is not always defined by genuine expertise. Sometimes it is communicated through symbols. A uniform, a professional title, an expensive office, or even a confident voice can influence our perceptions before we have examined the evidence ourselves. These external signs often create an impression of credibility, even when they reveal very little about a person's actual knowledge or intentions. One of the most famous demonstrations of this tendency came through psychological research exploring obedience. Participants were instructed by someone they believed to be an authority figure to perform actions that conflicted with their own moral instincts. Many continued simply because they assumed the person giving the instructions knew better than they did. The findings were unsettling, not because they suggested people are naturally cruel, but because they revealed how deeply the presence of authority can shape behavior. Under the right conditions, ordinary individuals may place obedience above personal judgment. This doesn't mean authority is something to fear. Genuine expertise is incredibly valuable. Imagine trying to perform surgery without trusting a trained surgeon or boarding an airplane while doubting every decision made by the flight crew. Civilization itself depends on people developing specialized knowledge and others recognizing that expertise. The challenge is learning to distinguish authentic authority from the appearance of authority. Modern life presents countless opportunities for confusion. Social media allows anyone to appear confident and knowledgeable. A large following, polished presentation, or persuasive speaking style can sometimes create the illusion of expertise. Yet confidence and competence are not always the same thing. Some of the wisest people speak with humility, while some of the loudest voices possess very little understanding. Learning to evaluate evidence rather than appearances is one of the most valuable skills we can develop. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within the power of authority is balance. Respect experience, but remain curious. Listen to experts, but continue thinking for yourself. Authority should guide thoughtful decision-making, not replace it. True wisdom often comes from combining the knowledge of others with your own careful observation and critical reflection. As influential as authority can be, another psychological force quietly reinforces it. Once we make a decision or publicly commit to a belief, our minds begin working hard to remain consistent with that choice. Even when new information appears, changing course can feel surprisingly difficult. In the next chapter, We'll explore why small commitments often grow into lasting identities, and how the simple desire to stay consistent quietly shapes the story we tell ourselves about who we are. 8. The commitment trap. Imagine standing at the foot of a long mountain trail. The first step seems almost insignificant. It requires very little effort, and turning back would be easy. You begin walking, telling yourself that you'll decide later whether to continue. After an hour, you've climbed higher. After several more hours, you've invested energy, time, and determination. Even if the path becomes steeper than you expected, the thought of turning around suddenly feels much more difficult. The mountain hasn't changed, but your relationship with the journey has. Every step you've already taken quietly encourages you to take one more. This gentle pull toward consistency lies at the heart of what psychologists often call the commitment trap. Once we make a choice, especially if we've expressed it publicly or invested time and effort into it, our minds naturally seek to remain consistent with that decision. We like to think of ourselves as logical and dependable. Changing our minds can feel uncomfortable because it seems to conflict with the story we tell ourselves about who we are. Take a moment to reflect on a small decision that gradually became something much larger. Perhaps you joined a gym with the simple intention of exercising once a week, only to discover months later that fitness had become part of your identity. Maybe you started reading a single book on a new subject and eventually found yourself building an entire library around that interest. Sometimes these commitments enrich our lives, quietly shaping us into stronger and more capable versions of ourselves. But commitment can also lead us down paths we never intended to follow. Imagine someone agreeing to help a colleague with one small task. A week later, they're asked for another favor, then another, because each request feels only slightly larger than the last. Saying yes becomes easier than saying no. Before long, they find themselves overwhelmed, wondering how such a small promise grew into such a large responsibility. The first commitment created a new expectation, not only in the eyes of others, but also within their own mind. This psychological pattern explains why many successful persuasion techniques begin with a small request rather than a large one. If someone first asks you for something simple that feels easy to accept, agreeing to a larger request later often feels more natural. Each small decision reinforces an image of yourself as someone who supports that cause, values that idea, or behaves in a particular way. Without realizing it, your identity begins adapting to match your actions. From an evolutionary perspective, consistency offered important advantages. Living in close-knit communities meant that trust depended heavily on predictability. People who honored their promises, followed through on commitments, and behaved consistently were more reliable partners in hunting, sharing resources, and raising families. A reputation for consistency strengthened cooperation and social stability. Over countless generations, our minds developed a preference for seeing ourselves as dependable individuals whose actions aligned with previous choices. However, modern life presents situations where this instinct can quietly work against us. We sometimes remain in careers that no longer inspire us simply because we've invested years pursuing them. We stay committed to projects long after they stop making sense because we've already devoted so much time and energy. Even relationships can continue long after they have become unhealthy, not because they still bring happiness, but because walking away feels like admitting that previous efforts were somehow wasted. Psychologists often refer to this as the influence of sunk costs. The more we invest in something, whether emotionally, financially, or personally, the harder it becomes to let go. Yet the past cannot be recovered by continuing down the wrong path. Sometimes the wisest decision is not the one that protects yesterday's investment, but the one that creates a better tomorrow. There is another fascinating side to commitment, one that can work in our favor. Positive habits often begin with incredibly small actions. Reading just one page a day can slowly transform someone into a lifelong reader. Practicing a musical instrument for only a few minutes each evening can eventually develop into remarkable skill. Tiny commitments, repeated consistently, have the power to reshape identity. We rarely become different people through one dramatic decision. More often, we become different through countless small choices that quietly accumulate over time. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within the commitment trap is that every small decision deserves a little more attention than it first appears to require. The first step may seem insignificant, but it often determines the direction of every step that follows. Awareness gives us the opportunity to ask an important question before making even the smallest commitment. Is this leading me toward the person I hope to become? As we continue exploring the hidden patterns of the human mind, we'll discover something even more surprising. What if your actions don't simply reflect who you are? What if, instead, your mind watches your own behavior and uses it to decide who you are becoming? In the next chapter, we'll explore the fascinating idea that sometimes we learn about ourselves by observing ourselves, just as carefully as we observe everyone else. 9. Self-perception theory. Imagine waking up one morning and finding a journal on your bedside table. It contains a detailed record of your actions over the past year, but it never mentions your thoughts or emotions. It simply describes what you did each day. It tells you how often you exercised, how frequently you helped strangers, how many books you finished, how patiently you listened to others, and how often you kept the promises you made. Now imagine reading that journal without remembering it was your own life. Based only on those actions, what kind of person would you believe the writer to be? The answer reveals something fascinating about the human mind. We often assume that our actions are driven by our identity. We believe that kind people perform kind acts because they are naturally kind, confident people take bold actions because they already possess confidence, and disciplined individuals maintain good habits because discipline is simply part of who they are. While there is certainly truth in this idea, psychology suggests that the relationship may also work in the opposite direction. This is the foundation of self-perception theory. Instead of always acting according to who we believe we are, we often discover who we are by observing our own behavior. In other words, our minds sometimes look at our actions and quietly draw conclusions about our personality, values, and identity. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you surprised yourself. Perhaps you volunteered to help someone even though you considered yourself shy. Maybe you stood up for a friend when you usually avoided conflict, or you completed a difficult challenge that you never thought you were capable of finishing. Afterward, you may have found yourself thinking, maybe I'm braver than I realized, or perhaps I'm more capable than I gave myself credit for. Notice what happened. Your behavior came first, and your identity quietly adjusted to match it. This process happens far more often than we realize. Imagine someone who decides to go for a short walk every evening. At first, they simply want a little exercise. After several weeks, however, they begin describing themselves differently. They no longer think, I'm someone trying to exercise. Instead, they start believing, I'm the kind of person who takes care of my health. The repeated behavior slowly reshapes their self-image. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes remarkable sense. Human beings are constantly trying to understand themselves just as they try to understand others. When our internal feelings are unclear or mixed, our brains naturally look for external evidence. And what evidence could be more convincing than our own actions? If we repeatedly behave in generous ways, our minds conclude that generosity must be part of our character. If we consistently avoid challenges, we may begin believing that we simply aren't courageous, even if the original reason for avoiding those challenges had nothing to do with fear. This principle reveals why small habits carry such extraordinary power. Every action becomes a vote for the kind of person we believe ourselves to be. Reading a few pages each day quietly reinforces the identity of being a reader. Practicing an instrument strengthens the belief that one is a musician. Showing patience during difficult conversations gradually builds the identity of someone who remains calm under pressure. None of these identities appear overnight. They are constructed slowly, one action at a time. There is also a caution hidden within this idea. Because our minds learn from our behavior, repeated negative actions can quietly shape our self-image as well. If someone continually tells themselves that they procrastinate, gives up easily, or never finishes what they start, those behaviors may begin feeling like permanent personality traits rather than temporary habits. The danger lies in confusing patterns with destiny. A behavior repeated many times can influence identity, but it does not imprison it. New actions can begin writing a new story at any moment. This understanding offers a gentle form of hope. You do not always have to wait until you feel confident before acting confidently. You do not need to feel completely fearless before taking a brave step. Sometimes action comes first, and belief follows quietly behind. By changing what we consistently do, we slowly change what we consistently believe about ourselves. Perhaps that is one of the most beautiful truths hidden within psychology. We are not merely passive observers of our identity. Through our everyday choices, we participate in creating it. Every small decision becomes a quiet conversation between our actions and our sense of self. As we continue this journey, we'll move from the stories we tell ourselves to the invisible influence we have on those around us. Because emotions, much like identity, are rarely contained within a single person. They spread quietly from one mind to another, shaping entire rooms without a single word being spoken. In the next chapter, we'll explore the remarkable phenomenon of emotional contagion and discover how feelings can become surprisingly contagious. 10. Emotional contagion. Imagine entering a room where a group of people are gathered. Before anyone speaks to you, before you know what conversation is taking place, you sense something. The atmosphere feels heavy, faces are serious, movements are slower, voices are quieter. Without anyone explaining what happened, you begin feeling slightly different yourself. Perhaps you become more cautious, more thoughtful, or even a little uneasy. Now imagine entering another room. This time people are laughing, conversations flow easily, and the energy feels warm and welcoming. Within moments, you find yourself smiling more, speaking more openly, and feeling lighter. Nothing about your day has changed. The only difference is the emotional environment you have entered. This invisible transfer of feelings is known as emotional contagion. It is the psychological process through which emotions spread from one person to another, often without conscious awareness. Just like a song can influence our mood or a beautiful landscape can create a feeling of peace, the emotions of people around us can quietly shape our own internal state. Take a moment to reflect on how often this happens in your own life. Have you ever spent time with someone who was extremely excited about an idea and found yourself becoming excited too? Have you ever spoken with someone who was deeply anxious and noticed that their nervousness began affecting you, even when you had no reason to feel worried? These moments reveal something fascinating about the human mind. We are not emotionally isolated beings. We are constantly influencing and being influenced by the emotional worlds of others. From an evolutionary perspective, emotional contagion served a vital purpose. Early humans survived by cooperating closely in groups. If one person noticed danger and felt fear, that emotion needed to spread quickly so others could respond. A shared sense of urgency could protect an entire community. Likewise, happiness, excitement, and trust helped groups bond together and work toward common goals. The ability to sense and mirror the emotions of others became an important social skill. One reason emotional contagion occurs is because humans are naturally designed to mirror one another. We unconsciously imitate facial expressions, body language, gestures, and vocal patterns. When someone smiles sincerely, the people around them often feel an urge to smile as well. When someone speaks with calm confidence, their composure can create a similar feeling in others. This process happens so quickly that we often experience the emotional shift before we even realize it has occurred. This phenomenon explains why certain people seem to transform the atmosphere around them. A calm person can bring stability into a stressful situation. A passionate person can inspire an entire group. A fearful person can spread uncertainty through a crowd. Leadership, friendship, and even parenting often depend on this invisible emotional exchange. People don't only listen to what we say, they also absorb the emotional signals we communicate. However, emotional contagion also reveals an important responsibility. Because emotions spread, our internal state can affect people around us more than we realize. A single moment of frustration can influence an entire conversation. A small act of kindness can brighten someone's day and perhaps influence how they treat the next person they meet. The emotional energy we carry into the world rarely stays contained within ourselves. This doesn't mean we should hide negative emotions or pretend to be positive all the time. Difficult emotions are a natural part of being human, and expressing them honestly can create deeper connections. The key difference lies between acknowledging an emotion and unconsciously spreading it. Awareness allows us to recognize what we are carrying and choose how we share it with others. Perhaps the most intriguing part of emotional contagion is that it challenges the idea that our minds exist separately from the people around us. We often imagine ourselves as independent individuals making isolated choices, yet psychology reveals a much more connected picture. Every conversation, every interaction, and every shared moment creates a subtle exchange of emotional information. Take a moment to reflect on the emotional environments you regularly enter. The people you spend time with, the content you consume, and the conversations you participate in all influence the mental atmosphere you experience. Just as we carefully choose the physical spaces where we spend our time, it may be equally important to notice the emotional spaces we inhabit. But emotions are only one part of the hidden machinery of the mind. Beneath our feelings exists another powerful system that determines how we interpret information itself. The human brain is constantly searching for ways to reduce effort and make sense of the endless stream of experiences around us. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the mind's desire for simplicity can shape what we believe, what we notice, and even what we accept as true. 11. Cognitive ease. Imagine walking through a forest at night with only a small flashlight in your hand. Every unfamiliar sound captures your attention. Every shadow feels important. Your mind works hard to analyze what you see because the environment is uncertain. Now imagine walking through the same forest during the day on a familiar path you've traveled many times before. Your steps become effortless. You no longer examine every tree or question every sound. Your mind relaxes because everything feels predictable. This difference between mental effort and mental comfort reveals a fascinating principle known as cognitive ease. Cognitive ease describes the brain's natural preference for information that is easy to process. When something feels familiar, simple, clear, or effortless to understand, our minds often experience it as more trustworthy and appealing. When something feels complicated, unfamiliar, or difficult to process, we tend to approach it with more caution and skepticism. Take a moment to reflect on how you react when you encounter a complicated explanation. Perhaps you read a paragraph filled with unfamiliar words and immediately feel uncertain. Then someone explains the same idea using a simple story or analogy, and suddenly it feels understandable. The information itself has not changed. The only difference is the amount of mental effort required to process it. The human brain is constantly trying to manage limited resources. Every moment, we are surrounded by countless pieces of information: sounds, images, conversations, memories, and decisions. If the mind carefully analyzed everything equally, everyday life would become exhausting. To function efficiently, the brain developed shortcuts that allow us to quickly judge what deserves attention and what can be processed with less effort. This ability is incredibly useful. Imagine having to consciously think about every step involved in walking, speaking, or recognizing a familiar face. Simple tasks would become overwhelming. Cognitive ease allows many everyday experiences to happen smoothly in the background, freeing our attention for more important challenges. However, this same efficiency can sometimes create unexpected mistakes. One of the most interesting aspects of cognitive ease is that our minds often confuse familiarity with truth. When we repeatedly encounter an idea, it becomes easier to process. Because it feels easier, our brains may interpret that feeling of comfort as a sign that the idea is reliable. This is why repeated statements can sometimes become more believable over time, even when repetition alone does not make something accurate. Think about a phrase you have heard many times, perhaps a common saying, a cultural belief, or a popular opinion. Its familiarity may create a sense of certainty, but if you pause and examine it carefully, you might discover that its acceptance came partly from how often you encountered it, rather than from how strongly it was supported by evidence. This principle also explains why simple messages are often more persuasive than complicated ones. A clear idea is easier to remember, repeat, and share. This is why slogans, memorable stories, and simple explanations often remain in people's minds long after detailed information has faded away. The easier something is to mentally process, the more comfortable it feels. Yet simplicity has another side. Not everything valuable is simple, and not everything complicated is wrong. Some of the most important ideas in science, philosophy, and human understanding require patience and effort. A difficult concept may challenge us precisely because it pushes the mind beyond familiar patterns. Growth often begins where cognitive ease ends. The goal, then, is not to avoid simplicity or complexity. It is to recognize when our minds are being guided by comfort rather than careful thought. Sometimes an easy answer is correct. Sometimes it is simply easier. Take a moment to reflect on the ideas you believe most strongly. Did you arrive at them through careful examination, or did they gradually become comfortable because you encountered them repeatedly? This question does not require abandoning your beliefs. It simply invites curiosity about how your mind creates certainty. The human brain is a remarkable instrument, but it is not a perfect one. It seeks patterns, reduces effort, and creates shortcuts to help us navigate an overwhelming world. Understanding cognitive ease gives us a glimpse into one of the quiet forces shaping our perception of reality. But if the mind naturally prefers information that confirms what feels comfortable, another question emerges. What happens when we encounter information that challenges what we already believe? Why do we sometimes reject evidence that contradicts our opinions while eagerly accepting information that supports them? In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most powerful psychological forces behind human beliefs, the tendency to search for confirmation rather than truth. 12. Confirmation bias. Imagine waking up one morning and looking outside your window. The sky is gray, the streets are quiet, and a light rain is falling. You think to yourself, I knew today was going to be a bad day. Later that evening, something unexpected happens. A friend sends you a kind message, you finish an important task, and you enjoy a peaceful moment with your family. Yet when you look back on the day, your mind may still focus on the unpleasant weather because it matches the story you created in the morning. This quiet tendency is known as confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the human tendency to search for, notice, and remember information that supports what we already believe while often overlooking or dismissing information that challenges those beliefs. It is one of the most powerful ways our minds shape our perception of reality. Instead of seeing the world exactly as it is, we often see a version of the world filtered through our existing expectations. Take a moment to reflect on a belief you hold strongly. It could be an opinion about a person, a social issue, a personal ability, or even a simple everyday preference. Now imagine encountering information that supports that belief. You may feel a sense of agreement, satisfaction, or even relief. But imagine encountering information that challenges it. You might immediately search for reasons why that information is incorrect, incomplete, or unreliable. This reaction is not necessarily a sign of stubbornness. It is a natural function of the human brain. Throughout history, beliefs helped humans navigate uncertain environments. Our ancestors needed quick interpretations of the world around them. If someone believed a certain area was dangerous, they paid closer attention to signs that confirmed the danger. If they believed a particular strategy helped them survive, they remembered successful outcomes. In many situations, quickly reinforcing useful beliefs was more valuable than constantly questioning everything. However, the modern world presents a challenge. We are no longer only trying to survive immediate physical threats. We are constantly exposed to enormous amounts of information, opinions, and competing explanations. In this environment, confirmation bias can quietly create mental walls that prevent us from seeing perspectives outside our own. Consider how this works in everyday conversations. Two people can witness the same event and walk away with completely different interpretations. One person notices the details that support their viewpoint, while another notices the details that support theirs. Both may feel completely certain that they are seeing reality clearly. The interesting part is that both experiences can feel genuine because the mind is not simply collecting information. It is organizing information into a meaningful story. This explains why disagreements can sometimes become so difficult. Often, people are not only defending ideas, they are protecting a sense of identity connected to those ideas. When a belief becomes part of how we define ourselves. Questioning it can feel less like examining information and more like facing a personal threat. The digital world has amplified this effect. Online platforms often show people content that matches their previous interests and opinions. Over time, individuals may find themselves surrounded by information that continuously confirms their existing views. This creates a comfortable environment, but it can also make alternative perspectives feel increasingly unfamiliar or unreasonable. The solution is not to distrust every belief we have. That would be impossible and exhausting. Instead, the goal is to develop intellectual curiosity, the willingness to ask, what evidence would change my mind? This simple question creates space for growth because it transforms disagreement from a threat into an opportunity to learn. Take a moment to consider the possibility that being wrong is not always a failure. Sometimes discovering that a belief needs adjustment is a sign of progress. The strongest minds are not those that never change. They are the ones capable of updating themselves when new information appears. Perhaps the most fascinating lesson of confirmation bias is that the mind is not designed only to discover truth. It is also designed to create stability. It tries to build a consistent story about who we are and how the world works. Sometimes that story guides us wisely. Other times, it quietly limits what we are willing to see. Understanding confirmation bias allows us to step outside our own mental patterns, even if only for a moment. It gives us the ability to observe our thoughts instead of automatically accepting them. But the mind does not only filter information about the world, it also creates a powerful illusion about our place within that world. We often believe we are being watched, judged, and remembered far more than we actually are. In the next chapter, we'll explore the spotlight effect, the fascinating reason why we often feel like everyone is paying attention to us, even when most people are focused on themselves. 30. The self-fulfilling prophecy. Imagine standing at the beginning of a long path that disappears into the distance. You cannot see exactly where it leads, but before you take the first step, you already have a belief about the journey. Perhaps you believe the path will be difficult. Perhaps you believe you will fail along the way. Or perhaps you believe that, even with obstacles, you are capable of continuing. The interesting question is this: does the belief merely describe the journey, or does it help create it? This question reveals one of the most powerful ideas in psychology, the self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when a belief or expectation influences our behavior in a way that eventually helps create the outcome we originally expected. In simple terms, what we believe about a situation can affect how we act within that situation, and our actions can gradually make that belief appear true. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you expected something to go well or badly. Perhaps you entered a conversation believing it would be uncomfortable. Because of that expectation, you became more nervous, spoke less openly, and interpreted small signs negatively. The interaction then felt awkward, confirming your original belief. The expectation influenced the behavior. The behavior influenced the outcome. The outcome reinforced the expectation. This is the quiet cycle of the self-fulfilling prophecy. The human mind is constantly creating predictions about the world. These predictions help us prepare, make decisions, and navigate uncertainty. However, expectations are not passive thoughts. They influence attention, motivation, confidence, and the choices we make. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability was useful. Anticipating possible outcomes helped humans survive. If someone expected danger, they became more alert. If they expected success from a particular strategy, they were more likely to continue using it. Predictions helped guide behavior. But in modern life, expectations can sometimes become invisible forces shaping our reality. Consider someone who believes they are not good at a particular skill. Because they expect failure, they may avoid practicing, give less effort, or quit quickly when challenges appear. Their lack of progress then seems to prove their original belief: I knew I couldn't do it. But the belief was not simply observing reality. It was influencing it. The same process can work in a positive direction. Someone who believes improvement is possible may approach challenges differently. They may practice longer, seek feedback, and remain persistent when difficulties appear. Their expectation creates behaviors that increase the possibility of success. This does not mean that positive thinking alone guarantees every outcome. Reality contains many factors beyond belief. Skills, resources, circumstances, and opportunities all matter. A person cannot simply imagine an outcome and expect the universe to provide it. The deeper lesson is that beliefs influence the actions that shape outcomes. The self-fulfilling prophecy also appears in relationships. If we assume someone dislikes us, we may become distant, defensive, or uncomfortable around them. They may respond to our behavior by becoming more distant themselves, creating the exact situation we feared. On the other hand, approaching someone with openness and trust can encourage a warmer response. Our expectations often become part of the environment we create. Take a moment to reflect on the expectations you carry about yourself. What stories have you repeated about your abilities, your personality, or your future? Which beliefs encourage growth, and which ones quietly place limits on what you attempt? Throughout this journey, we have explored many hidden forces that influence human behavior. We discovered that the mind creates shortcuts, protects beliefs, responds to expectations, and constantly interprets the world around us. We learn that our perception of reality is shaped not only by what happens, but by the meanings we attach to what happens. Perhaps the greatest psychological insight is that the mind is not simply a mirror reflecting reality. It is also a participant in creating our experience of it. Every expectation is a beginning. Every belief is a direction. Every action is a vote for the person we are becoming. The psychology of the human mind is filled with paradoxes. We seek truth, but sometimes protect illusions. We desire connection, but fear vulnerability. We want change, but often resist uncertainty. Yet within these contradictions exists something remarkable, the ability to become aware, adapt, and grow. Take a moment to reflect on everything explored throughout these 30 hidden psychology principles. The goal is not to control every thought or predict every behavior. The goal is simply to understand the invisible patterns that influence our lives. Because when we understand the mind, we gain the ability to choose more consciously. And perhaps that is the most powerful psychological insight of all. The mind shapes our world, but awareness gives us the opportunity to shape the mind. 14. Loss aversion. Imagine finding a small envelope on the street. Inside, you discover $100. A wave of excitement appears almost instantly. You feel fortunate, perhaps even surprised by your unexpected luck. Now imagine a different situation. You already have $100 in your pocket, and somehow it disappears before you get home. The emotional reaction feels completely different. The frustration, disappointment, and sense of unfairness may feel much stronger than the happiness you experienced from gaining the same amount. This strange imbalance reveals one of the most important discoveries in behavioral psychology: loss aversion. Loss aversion describes the human tendency to experience the pain of losing something more strongly than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. In simple terms, losing what we already have often feels worse than gaining something new feels good. The numbers may be identical, but the emotional impact is not. Take a moment to reflect on a decision you have made because you were afraid of losing something. Perhaps you stayed with a familiar situation because change felt risky. Maybe you held onto an old possession because of memories attached to it, even though you no longer used it. Or perhaps you avoided an opportunity because the possibility of failure felt more powerful than the possibility of success. These reactions are not random weaknesses. They are connected to deep survival instincts that developed over thousands of years. For our ancestors, losses could carry serious consequences. Losing a source of food, shelter, protection, or social connection could threaten survival. A person who paid close attention to potential losses was often better prepared to avoid danger. The mind became highly sensitive to threats because preventing a loss was frequently more valuable than discovering a new opportunity. This ancient programming still exists within modern minds, even though the nature of our losses has changed. Today, we may not be protecting a limited food supply or defending a small territory, but we still react strongly to losing money, status, relationships, opportunities, or even familiar routines. This principle explains many everyday behaviors. A person may refuse to sell an item they no longer need because they focus more on what they would lose by letting it go than what they could gain from the money. An investor may hold onto a failing investment because admitting the loss feels painful. Someone may remain in an unfulfilling situation because the uncertainty of change feels more threatening than the discomfort they already know. Interestingly, loss aversion also influences how choices are presented. The same information can create completely different emotional reactions depending on whether it is framed as a gain or a loss. Saying, "You have a 90% chance of success," feels very different from saying, "There is a 10% chance of failure," even though both statements describe the same reality. The mind often reacts more strongly to what might disappear than to what might be achieved. This explains why warnings are often more powerful than promises. Messages about avoiding mistakes, preventing problems, or protecting what we already have can capture attention more quickly than messages about potential rewards. The possibility of losing something activates a deeper emotional response. However, loss aversion can also quietly limit our lives. When fear of loss becomes too powerful, it can prevent growth. Starting a new career, learning a new skill, ending an unhealthy pattern, or taking a meaningful risk all involve leaving something familiar behind. The mind naturally focuses on what might be lost, but it may overlook what could be gained. The challenge is not to eliminate the fear of loss. That instinct is a fundamental part of being human. Instead, the goal is to recognize when that instinct is protecting us and when it is keeping us trapped. A careful decision considers both sides of the equation, what we might lose and what we might gain. Take a moment to reflect on the choices in your own life. Are there things you continue holding on to simply because releasing them feels painful? Are there opportunities you avoid because the possibility of failure feels larger than the possibility of success? Sometimes the greatest changes begin when we realize that staying the same also has a cost. Loss aversion reveals something profound about the human mind. We are not simply creatures seeking pleasure. We are also creatures trying to protect what we already possess. Our memories, identities, relationships, and possessions become extensions of ourselves, making the idea of losing them feel deeply personal. But the mind is influenced not only by what it might lose, it is also shaped by where the journey begins. The first piece of information we receive can quietly become a reference point that influences every judgment that follows. In the next chapter, we'll explore the anchoring effect and discover why the first number, first impression, or first idea we encounter can become a powerful invisible influence on our decisions. 15. Anchoring bias. Imagine walking into a store searching for a new watch. The first one you notice is displayed behind glass with a price tag of $2,000. It seems expensive, perhaps far beyond what you intended to spend. As you continue looking, you find another watch priced at $800. Suddenly, the second watch feels much more reasonable. It may still be expensive, but compared to the first one, it appears like a better deal. Now imagine entering the same store, but seeing a different first watch, one priced at $300. The $800 watch might now feel surprisingly expensive. The watch did not change, its quality did not change, only the first piece of information you encountered was different. This is the power of anchoring bias. Anchoring bias describes the human tendency to rely heavily on the first information we receive when making decisions. That initial piece of information becomes a mental reference point, influencing how we interpret everything that comes afterward. Even when the first information is irrelevant or arbitrary, it can quietly shape our judgments more than we realize. Take a moment to reflect on the first impression you had of someone you know. Perhaps when you first met them, they seemed confident, quiet, friendly, or distant. Over time, you may have learned more about their personality, but that original impression often remained part of how you viewed them. The first information your mind received became an anchor, influencing the way you interpreted later experiences. This psychological effect exists because the brain is constantly searching for efficient ways to process information. The world presents us with endless decisions, and carefully analyzing every detail would require enormous mental energy. Anchors provide a starting point. They give the mind something to compare against, creating a sense of structure in situations that might otherwise feel uncertain. From an evolutionary perspective, this shortcut was useful. Early humans often had to make quick judgments with limited information. If someone encountered a familiar environment, a known threat, or a previously successful strategy, using past information as a reference point helped them respond quickly. The ability to create mental shortcuts improved survival. However, in modern life, anchors can sometimes influence us in ways we don't expect. Businesses understand the power of anchoring extremely well. A product originally priced at a high amount and then offered at a discount often feels like a better opportunity because the original price creates the comparison point. A customer may focus less on the actual value of the product and more on how much they believe they are saving. Negotiations also rely heavily on anchors. The first number mentioned in a conversation can influence the entire discussion that follows. If someone begins with a high offer, the final agreement may remain closer to that number than it would have if the conversation started somewhere else. The initial suggestion creates a psychological center around which later decisions revolve. Anchoring also affects how we judge ourselves. Sometimes, the first labels we receive become powerful internal anchors. A person who is told they are naturally gifted may approach challenges differently from someone who is told they are not good at certain things. Early experiences, comments, and expectations can create reference points that influence future behavior. The interesting part about anchors is that they often operate quietly. We rarely notice them influencing our thoughts. A number, a phrase, or an initial impression can feel like objective reality when it is actually just the starting point our minds were given. This awareness invites a valuable question. Would I reach the same conclusion if I had received different information first? That single question can create distance between instinctive judgment and thoughtful analysis. It allows us to examine whether our decisions are based on genuine evaluation or simply on the first reference point we encountered. Of course, anchors are not always harmful. A helpful first impression, a useful estimate, or a valuable piece of knowledge can guide us effectively. The goal is not to remove anchors completely because the human mind naturally uses them. The goal is to recognize when an anchor is guiding us and decide whether it deserves our trust. Take a moment to reflect on the invisible anchors that may exist in your own life. The first advice you received, the first opinion you formed, the first number you heard, the first story you believed about yourself. Some anchors provide direction, others quietly limit where we are willing to go. Understanding anchoring bias reveals how easily perception can be shaped before we even realize a decision is being made. But there is another layer to this process. Even after information enters our minds, the way that information is presented can completely change how we interpret it. In the next chapter, we'll explore the framing effect and discover why the same reality can feel entirely different depending on the words used to describe it. 16. Framing effects. Imagine two doctors explaining the same medical treatment to two different patients. The first doctor says, "This procedure has a 90% survival rate." The second doctor says, "This procedure has a 10% chance of failure." Technically, both statements describe exactly the same reality. The numbers are identical. The outcome is unchanged. Yet emotionally, they feel completely different. One version creates a sense of hope and possibility. The other creates a sense of danger and uncertainty. The facts have remained the same, but the way those facts are presented has changed the way they are experienced. This is the power of framing. The framing effect describes the way people's decisions and perceptions are influenced by how information is presented rather than only by the information itself. The human mind does not process facts in a completely neutral way. The words, context, and emotional associations surrounding information can shape the meaning we attach to it. Take a moment to reflect on how differently you respond to certain phrases. A person described as a determined individual creates a different impression from someone described as stubborn. A difficult challenge described as an opportunity to grow feels different from one described as a risk of failure. The situation may be identical, but the mental frame surrounding it changes the emotional experience. This happens because the brain does not simply collect information. It interprets information. Every piece of knowledge enters a network of memories, emotions, expectations, and previous experiences. The way something is framed provides the mind with a pathway for understanding what that information means. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability was useful because humans needed to quickly evaluate situations. Our ancestors rarely had unlimited time to analyze every possibility. They relied on context and emotional signals to determine whether something represented safety, danger, opportunity, or threat. The frame surrounding an event helped guide action. Today, framing influences almost every area of life. In advertising, companies rarely sell products by describing only their practical features. Instead, they create emotional frames. A vehicle may be presented not simply as transportation, but as freedom, adventure, or security. A piece of clothing may become a symbol of confidence or identity. The product remains the same, but the meaning attached to it changes. In conversations, framing can determine how people respond to ideas. A request framed as a problem may create resistance, while the same request framed as a shared goal may encourage cooperation. A difficult conversation approached with blame often creates defensiveness, while the same conversation approached with curiosity can create understanding. Even the way we frame our own experiences influences our lives. Consider failure. One person may view a mistake as proof that they are incapable. Another may view the same mistake as information that helps them improve. The event itself is identical, but the personal meaning assigned to it creates very different emotional outcomes. However, framing also reveals a potential danger. Because presentation influences perception, information can be manipulated. A person can emphasize certain details while hiding others, creating a version of reality that supports a specific conclusion. Statistics can be presented in ways that create fear or confidence. Stories can highlight certain emotions while ignoring important context. A powerful frame can make one perspective feel obvious while making another seem invisible. This is why awareness matters. The goal is not to reject every message or assume every explanation is misleading. Instead, it is to develop the habit of asking deeper questions. What information is being emphasized? What information might be missing? Would I interpret this differently if the same facts were presented another way? These questions create space between the immediate emotional reaction and the deeper evaluation that follows. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of framing is that it reveals how much of reality is shaped by interpretation. We often believe we are responding directly to the world, but in many cases, we are responding to the meaning our minds have created around the world. Take a moment to reflect on the stories you tell yourself about your own life. Are your challenges framed as impossible obstacles or as experiences that can teach you something? Are your past mistakes framed as permanent failures or as chapters in a longer journey? The frame does not change what happened, but it can change what happens next. The human mind is constantly creating meaning, and the expectations we carry can influence not only how we see situations, but also how we perform within them. Sometimes, Simply believing that someone is capable can help them become more capable. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Pygmalion effect, the fascinating psychological phenomenon showing how expectations can quietly shape behavior, performance, and even the future we create for ourselves. 17. The Pygmalion effect. Imagine a young student sitting in a classroom, quietly looking down at a worksheet. The student believes they are average, perhaps even below average. They do not raise their hand often. They avoid difficult questions because they fear being wrong. Their teacher sees this hesitation and assumes the student lacks confidence or ability. Now imagine a different version of the same student. This time, the teacher believes something different. The teacher notices potential, offers encouragement, asks challenging questions, and communicates the expectation that the student is capable of achieving more. Slowly, something begins to change. The student participates more. They take greater risks. They begin believing in their own ability. Eventually, their performance improves. The interesting question is this: did the student improve because they always had hidden potential, or because someone else's belief helped bring that potential forward? This question lies at the heart of the Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect describes the psychological phenomenon in which higher expectations from others can lead to improved performance and behavior. In simple terms, when someone believes we are capable, we often become more likely to act in ways that prove that belief correct. Expectations can become invisible forces that shape the way people see themselves and what they believe they can achieve. Take a moment to reflect on someone who believed in you before you fully believed in yourself. Perhaps it was a teacher, a parent, a friend, or a mentor. Their confidence in you may have changed the way you approached challenges. Their encouragement may have given you the courage to try something you would have otherwise avoided. This effect occurs because expectations influence behavior in subtle ways. When someone expects success from us, they may communicate differently. They may provide more attention, offer more opportunities, give more constructive feedback, and show greater patience. These small differences create an environment where growth becomes more likely. From the perspective of the person receiving these expectations, the message can slowly become internalized. When others consistently treat someone as capable, that person may begin seeing themselves differently. Their confidence increases, their effort changes, and their willingness to face challenges expands. Eventually, the expectation becomes part of their own identity. The origins of this idea are connected to research on teacher expectations and student performance. Studies found that when educators were led to believe certain students had greater potential, those students sometimes showed greater improvement. The fascinating aspect was that the expectations themselves influenced the environment around the students, creating conditions where those expectations could become reality. However, the Pygmalion effect also reveals a more concerning possibility. Negative expectations can create the opposite outcome. If someone is repeatedly treated as incapable, unreliable, or unlikely to succeed, they may begin accepting that image of themselves. This can create a cycle where reduced confidence leads to reduced effort, fewer opportunities, and lower performance. The original expectation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This does not mean that belief alone creates unlimited ability. Positive expectations cannot replace practice, learning, resources, or genuine effort. Someone cannot simply believe they can fly and ignore the laws of physics, but expectations can influence motivation, confidence, persistence, and the willingness to continue when challenges appear. The Pygmalion effect reminds us that human beings are deeply responsive to the way they are perceived. The way we speak to others, the assumptions we make about them, and the opportunities we provide can quietly influence the person they become. This principle also applies inwardly. The expectations we hold about ourselves can become powerful forces. If we constantly assume we are incapable, our actions may begin reflecting that belief. If we approach ourselves with patience and the expectation that growth is possible, we create a different psychological environment. Take a moment to reflect on the expectations you carry. which beliefs about yourself were truly discovered through experience, and which were given to you by the opinions of others, which limitations feel like facts but may simply be old assumptions repeated for years. Perhaps one of the most powerful forms of influence is not control, persuasion, or authority. It is belief. The belief that someone can become more than they currently are. But expectations are not the only things that can shape reality. Sometimes, the mind can influence the body itself in ways that seem almost impossible. Our beliefs, assumptions, and expectations can create real physical responses, revealing a mysterious connection between thought and biology. In the next chapter, we'll explore the placebo effect and discover how the mind's expectations can sometimes become powerful enough to influence healing, pain, and physical experience. 18. The placebo mind. Imagine two patients sitting in different rooms of the same hospital. Both are experiencing similar pain. Both receive what they believe is a powerful new treatment designed to help them recover. They swallow the same type of pill and wait for the effects to begin. But there is something they do not know. The pill contains no active medication. It is simply a harmless substance. Yet some people begin to feel better. Their pain decreases, their symptoms improve, their bodies respond as though something real has changed. This mysterious connection between belief and physical experience is known as the placebo effect. The placebo effect reveals one of the most fascinating truths about the human mind. Expectations can influence the way we experience reality. Our thoughts do not exist separately from our bodies. The brain and body are constantly communicating, creating a complex relationship between what we believe, what we feel, and how we physically respond. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you expected something to happen before it actually did. Perhaps you felt nervous before an important event and noticed your heart beating faster. Maybe you imagined tasting your favorite food and found yourself almost experiencing the flavor. Or perhaps you felt calmer simply because someone you trusted assured you that everything would be okay. These moments reveal that the mind has the ability to create real experiences based on interpretation and expectation. From a biological perspective, the placebo effect is not imaginary. When people believe they are receiving help, the brain can trigger genuine physiological responses. Expectations may influence the release of certain chemicals in the body, affecting pain perception, stress responses, and emotional states. The experience is real, even when the original cause is based on belief rather than an active external treatment. Throughout history, humans have understood this connection in different ways. Ancient healers often used rituals, symbols, and ceremonies alongside physical treatments. While some practices lacked scientific explanation, the confidence and meaning attached to them could still influence how people experienced illness and recovery. Modern science has helped reveal that belief itself can become part of the healing process. However, the placebo effect does not mean that every illness can be cured through positive thinking alone. Serious medical conditions require proper diagnosis and treatment. The mind is powerful, but it is not magical. The true lesson of the placebo effect is not that imagination replaces medicine. Instead, it shows that psychological factors can influence physical experiences in ways we are only beginning to understand. The placebo effect also reveals the importance of trust and expectation. A treatment can feel more effective when delivered by someone we believe is knowledgeable and caring. The environment, the words used, and the confidence of the person providing help can all influence how we experience the outcome. This explains why two people can respond differently to the same situation. One person may view a challenge as overwhelming and experience intense stress. Another may view the same challenge as manageable and feel energized. The external circumstances may be identical, but the internal interpretation creates a different experience. The placebo effect invites a deeper question: how much of our daily experience is shaped by the meanings we assign to things? A conversation can feel healing because we believe we are understood. A familiar place can feel comforting because it represents safety. A simple gesture can become powerful because we attach emotional meaning to it. Our minds are constantly creating connections between thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. Take a moment to reflect on the beliefs you carry about yourself. Do you expect yourself to fail before you begin? Do you assume certain situations will always cause anxiety or discomfort? While these expectations may not control every outcome, they can influence how you approach experiences and how your mind responds to them. Perhaps the most fascinating lesson of the placebo effect is that belief is not merely a passive thought. It is an active force that can shape perception, behavior, and even biology. But the relationship between beliefs and reality can create another challenge. When our actions conflict with the image we have of ourselves, the mind experiences a strange internal tension. To restore balance, we often create explanations, change our beliefs, or reinterpret our actions. In the next chapter, we'll explore cognitive dissonance, the psychological conflict that occurs when the person we believe we are does not match the things we do. 19. Cognitive dissonance. Imagine someone who considers themselves a healthy person. They believe strongly in taking care of their body, eating well, and making responsible choices. Yet one evening, after a stressful day, they find themselves eating an entire box of unhealthy snacks while watching television. The next morning, they remember what happened and feel a strange discomfort. A quiet conflict appears. I care about my health, but I did something that goes against that belief. Both thoughts exist at the same time, creating an uncomfortable tension inside the mind. This psychological tension is known as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance describes the discomfort we experience when our beliefs, values, attitudes, or actions contradict one another. Humans naturally seek a sense of harmony between what we believe and what we do. When those two parts of ourselves do not align, the mind begins searching for a way to restore balance. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you experienced this feeling. Perhaps you made a decision you later questioned. Maybe you defended an opinion and then discovered information that challenged it. Or perhaps you continued a habit you knew was not beneficial, while simultaneously believing you should change. That uncomfortable feeling is often cognitive dissonance, quietly asking for resolution. The interesting part is how the mind responds. Sometimes we change our behavior. The person who values health may decide to exercise more regularly or adjust their eating habits. Sometimes we change our beliefs. They might convince themselves that their actions were not actually harmful. Other times, we create explanations that make the contradiction feel less uncomfortable. This process happens because maintaining a consistent sense of identity is deeply important to us. We like to believe we are logical, responsible, and in control of our choices. When evidence challenges that image, the mind often works to protect our sense of self. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency has advantages. A stable identity helps us make decisions and navigate social relationships. Constantly questioning every belief and action would create overwhelming uncertainty. The brain needs a way to maintain continuity between who we were yesterday and who we believe we are today. However, this same desire for consistency can sometimes prevent growth. Imagine someone who spends years following a particular path, perhaps a career, relationship, or personal belief system. Over time, they begin noticing signs that the path may no longer fit them. Yet admitting this creates discomfort because it would mean accepting that previous choices may not have been ideal. Instead of changing direction, they may create reasons to justify continuing. They might focus only on the benefits, dismiss the problems, or convince themselves that leaving would be a mistake. The mind chooses emotional comfort over difficult reflection. This is why people sometimes defend decisions they privately question. The issue is not always the decision itself. The deeper challenge is protecting the story they have built around that decision. Cognitive dissonance also explains why changing someone's mind can be so difficult. When a belief becomes connected to identity, new information is no longer processed as simple information. It may feel like a challenge to the person's sense of self. The mind naturally becomes defensive, searching for ways to reduce the discomfort. But cognitive dissonance is not only an obstacle, it can also become a powerful tool for personal growth. That uncomfortable moment when our actions and values conflict can reveal important truths. It can show us where our behavior does not match the person we want to become. Instead of immediately escaping the discomfort, we can use it as a signal for reflection. Take a moment to consider the contradictions within your own life. Are there beliefs you hold that your actions do not support? Are there habits you continue despite knowing they no longer serve you? Are there stories you tell yourself because they are easier to accept than the truth? These questions are not meant to create guilt. They are invitations to understand the mind more deeply. Perhaps maturity is not the absence of contradiction. Every human being experiences moments where thoughts, feelings, and actions fail to align perfectly. The difference lies in how we respond when those moments appear. We can protect the old story, or we can allow ourselves to write a new one. The human mind constantly seeks balance, but sometimes the path to balance requires change. And sometimes, the very people who challenge our decisions can unexpectedly become people we grow closer to. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Benjamin Franklin effect, a fascinating psychological phenomenon showing why helping someone can sometimes make us like them more, even when we initially felt neutral or uncertain about them. 20. The Benjamin Franklin effect. Imagine meeting someone for the first time and immediately feeling uncertain about them. Perhaps they seem distant, unfamiliar, or simply different from you. There is no strong dislike, but there is no connection either. Now imagine that a few days later, this same person asks you for a small favor. You help them, perhaps by sharing some information, offering assistance, or giving a little of your time. Afterward, something unexpected happens. You begin feeling slightly warmer toward them. At first, this seems strange. Shouldn't we like people more when they help us? Why would helping someone else change the way we feel about them? This unusual psychological pattern is known as the Benjamin Franklin effect. The Benjamin Franklin effect describes the tendency for people to develop more positive feelings towards someone after they have done that person a favor. In other words, sometimes we don't only help people because we like them. Sometimes we begin liking people because we have helped them. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you invested effort into someone or something. Perhaps you spent hours helping a friend, mentoring someone, or supporting a cause. After giving your time and energy, did you find yourself feeling more connected to that person or idea? This happens because the mind naturally tries to create consistency between our actions and our beliefs. The human brain often reasons in a simple way. If I chose to help this person, there must be a reason. One possible explanation is that we must see something valuable in them. Instead of thinking, I helped someone I don't care about, the mind may quietly adjust the story. I helped them because they are someone worth helping. This process protects our sense of internal consistency. The effect is connected to the same psychological mechanisms behind cognitive dissonance. When our actions and feelings do not match, the mind experiences tension. Helping someone we feel neutral about creates a small contradiction. To resolve that discomfort, the brain may shift our feelings closer to our behavior. From a historical perspective, this idea has an interesting connection to one of America's founding figures, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin described a situation where he asked a rival, someone who disliked him, for a small favor. Instead of damaging their relationship, the interaction unexpectedly improved it. Franklin noticed that when someone willingly helped him, they became more favorable toward him afterward. This observation reflected a deeper truth about human psychology. Our actions influence the way we see others. The Benjamin Franklin effect appears in many areas of life. A team member who helps a colleague with a difficult task may develop stronger respect and connection with that person. A teacher who invests time helping a student may become more emotionally attached to that student's success. A community member who volunteers for a cause may feel a deeper bond with the people involved. The effort we give can create emotional investment. This principle also reveals something fascinating about relationships. We often assume that connection comes first and effort follows. We believe we help people because we already care about them. But sometimes the opposite happens. The act of contributing, supporting, and investing can create the very feelings that make relationships stronger. However, this effect also reminds us to be thoughtful about where we invest our energy. Because effort can increase attachment, people may sometimes continue supporting situations that no longer serve them simply because they have already invested so much. The same psychological forces that create connection can also make letting go more difficult. The key is awareness. Helping others is one of the most meaningful human experiences, but understanding why it affects our emotions allows us to recognize the deeper processes at work. Perhaps one of the most beautiful lessons hidden within the Benjamin Franklin effect is that kindness is not only something we give to others, it also changes us. Every act of support, patience, and generosity leaves a mark on the person offering it. Take a moment to consider the people you have helped throughout your life. Some of your strongest relationships may not have formed because you immediately connected with someone. They may have grown because you chose to show up, offer support, and invest in another person. Sometimes the heart follows the actions of the hands. But the mind does not only shape how we form relationships, it also shapes how we remember the experiences within them. Interestingly, our memories are not perfect recordings of the past. They are carefully constructed stories influenced by moments of intensity and the way experiences end. In the next chapter, we'll explore the peak end rule and discover why our memories often focus less on the entire journey and more on the moments that stand out the most. 21. The peak end rule. Imagine going on a long vacation that lasts several days. Most of the trip is pleasant. You visit beautiful places, enjoy good meals, and experience many ordinary moments of relaxation. However, one afternoon brings an unexpected problem. A delayed flight creates stress, plans change, and the final hours of the journey feel exhausting. Years later, someone asks you about that vacation. What do you remember? Interestingly, you may not remember every meal, every conversation, or every quiet moment. Instead, your mind may return to the most intense emotional moment and the way the experience ended. Perhaps the frustrating airport experience dominates your memory, or perhaps a final peaceful evening overlooking a beautiful view becomes the part you remember most. This is the foundation of the peak end rule. The peak end rule describes the psychological tendency to remember an experience based primarily on two moments: the emotional peak, which is the most intense point of the experience, and the ending. Instead of creating a perfect average of everything that happened, the mind often gives greater importance to the moments that stand out the most. Take a moment to reflect on some of your strongest memories. Think about a concert, a journey, a relationship, or a significant event from your past. Your memory is probably not a detailed recording of every minute. Instead, certain moments appear brighter than others. A powerful conversation, a surprising event, a moment of joy, or a difficult challenge may define the entire experience. This happens because the brain is not designed simply to store information. It is designed to create meaning. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Our ancestors needed to remember important moments, especially those connected to danger, opportunity, or strong emotions. A completely average memory of an event might not be useful. Remembering the moment when something important changed could help guide future decisions. The brain naturally highlights experiences that carry emotional significance. The peak end rule influences everyday life in ways we often overlook. Consider how people remember restaurants. A meal may contain many excellent dishes, but one disappointing course can affect the entire impression. Alternatively, a restaurant may be average throughout the evening, but a warm interaction at the end can leave guests with a surprisingly positive feeling. This principle also explains why endings matter so much. A final moment can reshape how an entire experience is remembered. A thoughtful goodbye can make a relationship feel more meaningful. A satisfying conclusion can make a long project feel successful. Even a difficult journey can become a positive memory if it ends with a feeling of accomplishment. Businesses, entertainers, and storytellers often understand this instinctively. A memorable final scene in a movie can influence how audiences feel about the entire story. A hotel may focus heavily on the checkout experience because the last interaction can shape a guest's overall impression. A speaker may carefully plan the final words of a presentation because people often remember the ending long after the details have faded. However, the peak end rule also reveals something surprising about the reliability of memory. Because our minds emphasize certain moments, our memories may not always represent the complete reality of what happened. A long experience filled with mostly positive moments can be remembered negatively because of one painful peak. A difficult period can be remembered warmly because of one meaningful moment at the end. This does not mean our memories are false. It simply means they are constructed through a process of interpretation. The mind selects certain moments and uses them to create a story. Understanding this can change the way we approach our own experiences. If we know that peaks and endings carry unusual importance, we can become more intentional about creating meaningful moments. A small act of kindness at the end of a conversation, a moment of gratitude after completing a challenge, or a peaceful conclusion to a difficult day can influence how we remember the entire experience. Take a moment to reflect on the endings in your own life. The final words you speak to someone, the way you finish a project, the moments you create before leaving a place. Sometimes, the ending becomes the lens through which everything else is viewed. The peak end rule reveals that the mind is not simply a storage device for memories. It is a storyteller carefully choosing moments that define our personal narratives. But even when an experience has ended, the mind does not always let go immediately. Some unfinished events continue to return to our thoughts, demanding attention until they feel complete. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Zeigarnik effect, the fascinating reason why unfinished tasks, unanswered questions, and incomplete experiences often remain active in our minds long after we have moved away from them. 22. The Zeigarnik effect. Imagine lying in bed at the end of a long day, ready to fall asleep. The room is quiet, your body is relaxed, and everything seems peaceful. Then suddenly your mind returns to something unfinished, a conversation you never completed, an email you forgot to send, a task you started but never finished. Even though the day is over, your brain continues returning to this incomplete moment, as if it is quietly asking, what happens next? This strange mental persistence is known as the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect describes the tendency for unfinished tasks and incomplete experiences to remain more active in our minds than completed ones. When something is left unresolved, the brain often keeps a mental connection open, creating a feeling of tension that encourages us to return and complete it. Take a moment to reflect on an unfinished task in your own life. Perhaps there is a book you started reading but never finished, a project that has been waiting for your attention, or a decision you have been postponing. Notice how these incomplete things often return to your thoughts without invitation. They seem to occupy a small corner of your mind, quietly reminding you that something remains unfinished. This phenomenon was first observed by psychologist Bloomer Zeigarnik, who noticed something interesting about waiters in restaurants. They seem to remember unpaid orders much more clearly than completed ones. Once a customer had paid and the interaction was finished, the details quickly faded from memory. But while the order was still incomplete, it remained active in their minds. This simple observation revealed something profound about how memory works. The brain does not treat every piece of information equally. Experiences that feel incomplete often receive additional mental attention because the mind is naturally drawn toward resolution. Completion creates closure, while unfinished situations create a psychological tension that encourages continued focus. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency likely provided important advantages. For early humans, forgetting unfinished tasks could have serious consequences. A person who remembered an incomplete shelter repair, an unresolved threat, or an unfinished search for resources would have been better prepared for survival. The brain developed a system that kept important unfinished matters active until they were resolved. Today, the same mechanism appears in much simpler situations. A mystery in a book keeps you turning pages because your mind wants closure. A television series ending with an unanswered question creates curiosity for the next episode. A difficult puzzle can remain in your thoughts long after you stop working on it. The incomplete nature of these experiences creates a mental pull. This is why curiosity is such a powerful force. Questions that remain unanswered often feel more compelling than information that is already complete. The mind naturally wants to close open loops. However, the Zeigarnik effect has another side. While it can motivate productivity and problem-solving, it can also contribute to mental overload. Too many unfinished responsibilities can create a constant background sense of pressure. When every task remains open, the mind may struggle to rest because it continues carrying unresolved information. This explains why writing things down can feel surprisingly calming. Creating a list, making a plan, or organizing unfinished responsibilities can signal to the brain that the information has been safely stored. The mind no longer needs to constantly remind you because the responsibility has moved from memory into a reliable external system. The Zeigarnik effect also reveals something interesting about creativity. Many ideas continue developing beneath conscious awareness after we stop actively working on them. A solution to a problem may appear while walking, showering, or relaxing because the brain continues processing unfinished questions in the background. Take a moment to reflect on the unfinished chapters of your own life. Some may represent responsibilities waiting for completion. Others may represent dreams, conversations, or personal goals that have remained quietly unresolved. Not every open loop needs immediate action, but noticing them can reveal what continues to matter to you. Perhaps the mind's desire for completion is not simply a source of distraction. It is also a signal. The things that return to us repeatedly often reveal where our attention, energy, and emotions are still invested. The unfinished has a strange power because it keeps the possibility of completion alive. But unanswered questions do more than remain in our thoughts. They also capture our attention, making us seek information and continue exploring. This same psychological force is behind some of the most compelling stories, mysteries, and conversations in human life. In the next chapter, we'll explore curiosity loops and discover why the human mind is naturally drawn toward unanswered questions and incomplete information. 23. Curiosity loops. Imagine walking through a quiet hallway and noticing a door slightly open at the end. You cannot see what is inside. There is no sign explaining where it leads. You only see a small gap, just enough to suggest that something exists beyond it. Almost immediately, your mind begins creating questions. What is behind the door? Why is it open? Who was there before? The mystery itself becomes difficult to ignore. Even though you have no immediate reason to know the answer, your attention has been captured. This is the power of curiosity loops. A curiosity loop occurs when the mind becomes aware of a gap between what it knows and what it wants to know. That gap creates a feeling of tension, encouraging us to search for information that will complete the missing piece. The human brain is naturally drawn toward unanswered questions because uncertainty creates a desire for resolution. Take a moment to reflect on the last time a story completely captured your attention. Perhaps it was a movie that ended with a mystery, a book that introduced an unanswered question, or a conversation where someone said, "I have something surprising to tell you." Often, the most powerful part was not the information you received, but the anticipation before receiving it. The mind becomes fascinated by the space between the question and the answer. This tendency is deeply connected to how humans learn. Curiosity is not simply a desire for entertainment. It is a biological mechanism that motivates exploration. Throughout history, curiosity encouraged humans to investigate unfamiliar environments, discover new resources, develop technologies, and understand the world around them. For our ancestors, curiosity had practical value. Wondering what existed beyond a mountain, what caused a strange sound, or which plants were safe to eat, could lead to important discoveries. The individuals who explored, questioned, and searched for answers often gained advantages over those who ignored uncertainty. Today, curiosity loops appear everywhere. Storytellers use them to keep audiences engaged. A mystery at the beginning of a film creates questions that encourage viewers to continue watching. A novel introduces a problem that makes readers want to discover the solution. Even a simple conversation can become more engaging when it creates anticipation. This is why phrases like, "You won't believe what happened next," or "There is one important detail nobody noticed," immediately capture attention. They create an information gap. The mind recognizes that something is missing and naturally wants to fill that space. However, curiosity loops are not limited to entertainment. They also influence learning, creativity, and personal growth. A question can become the beginning of an entire journey. Many scientific discoveries began with simple curiosity. Why does this happen? How does this work? What if we tried something different? A curious mind is not satisfied with simply accepting the surface of things. It searches deeper. Yet curiosity can also be manipulated. Because unanswered questions are so powerful, they can be used to capture attention without providing meaningful value. Headlines, advertisements, and online content often create curiosity gaps designed to keep people engaged. Sometimes the answer is valuable. Other times, the mystery exists only to hold attention for as long as possible. This creates an important distinction between meaningful curiosity and endless distraction. A good curiosity loop leads somewhere. It provides understanding, insight, or discovery. A harmful curiosity loop keeps the mind searching without satisfaction. Take a moment to consider where your curiosity leads you. The questions you repeatedly return to often reveal something about your interests, values, and imagination. What you are curious about can become a quiet reflection of who you are becoming. Perhaps curiosity is one of the mind's most beautiful qualities because it represents the desire to move beyond what is already known. It reminds us that uncertainty is not always something to eliminate. Sometimes, uncertainty is an invitation. The unanswered question is not merely an empty space. It is a doorway. But curiosity is not only created by questions. Sometimes, influence comes from what is not said at all. Silence can create anticipation, encourage reflection, and reveal more than words ever could. In the next chapter, we'll explore the psychology of strategic silence and discover why the absence of communication can sometimes become one of the most powerful forms of communication. 24. Strategic silence. Imagine sitting across from someone during an important conversation. You make a statement, perhaps explaining your thoughts or making a request. Then, instead of immediately responding, the other person becomes silent. A few seconds pass. Then a few more. Suddenly, the silence feels heavier than the original conversation. Your mind begins searching for meaning. Did they disagree? Did you say something wrong? Are they thinking carefully? Should you explain yourself further? The silence itself has become part of the conversation. This is the psychological power of strategic silence. Strategic silence is the intentional use of pauses and quiet moments to create space for thought, encourage reflection, or allow information to have greater impact. While silence may appear empty on the surface, it often communicates something powerful. It can create curiosity, reveal emotions, and influence the direction of an interaction. Take a moment to reflect on how uncomfortable silence can sometimes feel. In many cultures, people are taught that conversations should flow continuously. When a pause appears, we often rush to fill it. We explain more, add unnecessary details, or reveal information we originally intended to keep private. The desire to remove silence can become so strong that we forget the value of simply waiting. This reaction happens because silence creates uncertainty. The human mind naturally seeks completion and clarity. When information is missing, we begin searching for explanations. A quiet moment gives our thoughts room to become active. From an evolutionary perspective, sensitivity to silence may have developed as a way to understand social situations. In early human groups, pauses, facial expressions, and body language provided important information. A sudden silence could signal danger, disagreement, curiosity, or a need for attention. Humans became highly skilled at interpreting what happens beyond spoken words. Today, silence remains a powerful social tool. Consider a negotiation. Someone makes an offer, and the other person remains quiet. That pause can create pressure because the first person begins wondering what the silence means. They may offer additional information, adjust their position, or reveal their priorities without being asked. The person who remains silent gains time to observe and understand. However, strategic silence is not about manipulation. At its best, silence is a form of respect. It allows people to think, process emotions, and express themselves without feeling rushed. A thoughtful pause before answering a difficult question can communicate consideration. Listening without immediately interrupting can make another person feel genuinely heard. In everyday relationships, silence can also create deeper connection. Sometimes the most meaningful moments with another person are not filled with constant conversation. Sitting together quietly, sharing a peaceful moment, or allowing someone time to process their feelings can communicate comfort in ways words cannot. Yet silence can also be misunderstood. A pause does not always mean disagreement. Quietness does not always represent confidence or wisdom. The meaning of silence depends heavily on context, relationship, and intention. A thoughtful pause and an attempt to avoid communication may appear similar from the outside, but carry completely different meanings. Understanding this difference is important because communication is not only about speaking. It is also about timing, attention, and the space between words. Take a moment to consider your own relationship with silence. Do you feel the need to immediately respond whenever a conversation slows down? Do you allow yourself and others enough space to think? Sometimes the most insightful answers appear only after the noise disappears. Perhaps silence is powerful because it creates room for something else to emerge. A deeper thought, a more honest response, a clearer understanding. In a world filled with constant information and endless conversation, silence has become increasingly rare. Yet rare things often become more valuable. A moment of quiet attention can communicate patience, confidence, and presence. But meaningful communication is not only about knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. It is also about understanding the person on the other side of the conversation. The ability to make someone feel truly heard can create trust, connection, and influence without requiring persuasion. In the next chapter, we'll explore active listening, the psychological power of giving someone your full attention and why feeling understood can be one of the strongest human experiences. 25. The power of active listening. Imagine sharing something important with another person. Perhaps you are explaining a difficult experience, describing a dream you have, or simply talking about something that has been on your mind. While you speak, the other person looks at their phone, interrupts frequently, or seems to be preparing their own response rather than truly hearing your words. Even though they are physically present, something feels missing. Now imagine a different experience. Someone sits with you, gives you their full attention, remembers small details, and responds in a way that shows they understand not only your words, but also the feelings behind them. The difference is profound. This is the power of active listening. Active listening is the practice of fully focusing on another person's communication, understanding their message, and responding with genuine attention rather than simply waiting for a chance to speak. It is more than hearing sounds. It is an intentional process of being mentally and emotionally present. Take a moment to reflect on the last time you felt truly understood by someone. Perhaps it was during a meaningful conversation with a close friend, a mentor, or someone who simply gave you space to express yourself without judgment. That feeling of being heard can create a powerful sense of connection. This happens because humans have a deep psychological need for recognition. We do not only want our words to be received, we want our experiences, emotions, and perspectives to be acknowledged. The mind constantly searches for signs of acceptance and belonging. When someone listens carefully, it communicates a subtle but powerful message. Your thoughts matter, your experiences are important, you are worth paying attention to. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability developed because human survival has always depended on cooperation. Groups that communicated effectively were more likely to solve problems, avoid conflict, and support one another. Understanding another person's intentions and emotions was essential for building trust. Active listening became one of the foundations of human connection. However, true listening is surprisingly difficult. The mind naturally wants to respond, judge, compare, or prepare the next statement. While someone else is speaking, we often begin creating our own thoughts instead of fully processing theirs. We may hear the words but miss the meaning behind them. This is why active listening requires effort. It involves slowing down the automatic urge to react and creating space for understanding. One of the most powerful aspects of active listening is that it can transform conversations. When people feel heard, they often become more open and honest. Defensiveness decreases because they no longer feel the need to prove themselves. Instead of becoming a battle between two opinions, the conversation becomes an exchange of perspectives. This does not mean agreeing with everything another person says. Understanding someone is different from accepting every belief or action. Active listening is about accurately recognizing another person's viewpoint before responding. In relationships, this skill can be transformative. Many conflicts continue not because people have nothing to say, but because both sides are trying to be understood while neither side is truly listening. Sometimes, the greatest change occurs when someone feels safe enough to explain what they actually mean. The power of active listening also extends beyond personal relationships. Leaders, teachers, and counselors often rely on this ability because people are more likely to trust those who make them feel valued. Influence does not always come from having the strongest argument. Sometimes it comes from creating the feeling that another person has been genuinely seen. Take a moment to reflect on the conversations you have today. How often do you listen with the goal of understanding rather than responding? How often do you give someone your complete attention without planning what you will say next? In a world filled with distractions, focused attention has become a rare form of kindness. Perhaps active listening is powerful because it offers something people quietly search for throughout their lives: the experience of being recognized. But understanding others is only one side of human connection. The mind also uses shortcuts to judge people quickly, often based on limited information. These rapid impressions can influence relationships, opportunities, and decisions before we are even aware of them. In the next chapter, we'll explore the halo effect, the psychological tendency that causes one positive trait to influence how we perceive an entire person. 26. The halo effect. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. They smile warmly, speak confidently, and make you feel comfortable within the first few minutes of conversation. Without realizing it, your mind begins forming a larger impression of who they are. They seem intelligent. They seem trustworthy. They seem like someone who would be successful. But here is the interesting question. How much of that judgment is based on real evidence, and how much is created from a single positive impression? This is the mystery behind the halo effect. The halo effect is a psychological bias in which one positive quality influences our perception of a person's other qualities. When we notice one appealing trait, such as attractiveness, confidence, kindness, or intelligence, our minds often assume that additional positive traits must also exist. In simple terms, one bright characteristic can create a halo that changes the way we see everything else. Take a moment to reflect on someone you admire. Perhaps there is a person you consider successful, talented, or inspiring. Now ask yourself, do you sometimes assume they are also wiser, kinder, or more capable in areas where you have little information? This is the halo effect quietly influencing perception. The human mind naturally searches for patterns. When we encounter limited information about someone, we attempt to create a complete picture as quickly as possible. Rather than evaluating every characteristic separately, the brain creates a general impression and uses that impression to fill in the missing details. From an evolutionary perspective, this shortcut was useful. Humans often had to make rapid judgments about others. Determining whether someone appeared safe, cooperative, or trustworthy could be important in social groups. Quick impressions helped people navigate relationships efficiently. However, in modern life, these mental shortcuts can sometimes lead us astray. The halo effect appears in many everyday situations. A confident speaker may be perceived as more knowledgeable, even when confidence and expertise are not always connected. A physically attractive person may be judged as more friendly or successful despite appearance, revealing very little about personality. A person with one impressive skill may be assumed to have abilities in completely unrelated areas. This effect also influences how we view public figures, leaders, and experts. When someone becomes associated with success or popularity, people may unconsciously extend that positive image to other aspects of their character. A person's achievements in one area can create the assumption that they possess wisdom or authority everywhere. The opposite can happen as well. A single negative impression can create a reverse effect, sometimes called the horn effect. One mistake, unpleasant interaction, or undesirable trait can influence how we perceive everything else about someone. The mind may begin searching for evidence that supports the initial negative impression. This reveals something important about human judgment. First impressions can be powerful, but they are not always accurate. The halo effect does not mean that our instincts are always wrong. Sometimes first impressions provide useful information. A person's behavior, communication style, and emotional signals can reveal genuine qualities. The challenge comes when we allow one piece of information to become the entire story. Take a moment to consider how this applies to yourself. Have you ever assumed someone understood you completely based on one mistake? Have you ever allowed one achievement or failure to define your entire identity? The same mental shortcut we use to judge others can also shape how we judge ourselves. A person who succeeds in one area may begin believing they should succeed everywhere. Someone who struggles in one situation may begin viewing themselves as incapable. The mind often creates broad conclusions from limited evidence. Understanding the halo effect encourages a more balanced way of seeing people. It reminds us that every person contains complexity. Someone can be talented in one area and still have weaknesses in another. Someone can make mistakes and still possess valuable qualities. Perhaps the most interesting lesson is that perception is not simply a reflection of reality. It is an interpretation created by the mind. We do not always see people as they are. Sometimes we see them through the glow of our own assumptions. But the mind's tendency to simplify does not only influence how we judge individuals. It also affects how we evaluate our own abilities and predict what we can achieve. Sometimes, the beliefs we carry about our potential become invisible limits that shape our actions. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Dunning-Kruger effect, the fascinating psychological pattern that explains why people with limited knowledge in an area may sometimes feel surprisingly confident, while true experts often recognize how much they still have to learn. 27. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Imagine someone learning a new skill for the very first time. Perhaps they pick up a musical instrument, try painting, begin studying a new language, or explore a complex subject. At the beginning, everything seems surprisingly simple. They learn a few basic ideas, experience a small amount of success, and suddenly feel as though they understand much more than they actually do. Then, as they continue learning, something unexpected happens. The more they discover, the more they realize how much they do not know. The confidence that once felt certain begins to change. What appeared simple becomes complex. What seemed obvious becomes filled with deeper questions. This fascinating pattern is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect describes a cognitive bias in which people with limited knowledge or experience in a particular area may overestimate their abilities, while people with greater expertise often become more aware of the complexity of the subject. In simple terms, beginners may not know enough to recognize their own limitations, while experts understand enough to recognize how much remains unknown. Take a moment to reflect on something you once believed you understood completely. Perhaps it was a topic you studied briefly, a skill you tried for a short time, or an opinion you formed before exploring the subject deeply. Later, as you gain more information, you may have realized that the reality was far more complicated than you first imagined. This experience is not unusual. It is part of the natural process of learning. When we first encounter a subject, our knowledge is limited. Because we do not yet understand the deeper layers, we cannot see the gaps in our understanding. The unknown remains invisible because we do not know what questions to ask. This creates a strange paradox. Sometimes the less we know, the more confident we feel. As learning continues, awareness grows. We begin discovering new details, exceptions, challenges, and perspectives. Confidence may decrease temporarily because our understanding becomes more realistic. Eventually, with enough experience, confidence can return, but this time it is supported by deeper knowledge and a clearer awareness of limitations. From an evolutionary perspective, this pattern connects to the brain's natural desire to create quick interpretations of the world. Humans need to make decisions, often without complete information. Confidence can help encourage action and exploration. However, when confidence grows faster than understanding, mistakes become more likely. The Dunning-Kruger effect appears in many areas of life. Someone who has just learned a few concepts about a complicated topic may feel ready to debate experienced professionals. A new employee may underestimate the challenges of a role because they have not yet encountered the hidden complexities. A person may judge a difficult skill as easy because they have not yet experienced the effort required to master it. At the same time, the effect also explains why experts sometimes appear less certain. A person with years of experience often recognizes the many variables involved in a situation. Instead of saying, "This is simple," they may say, "It depends," because they understand the complexity beneath the surface. This humility is not weakness. It is often a sign of deeper understanding. However, the Dunning-Kruger effect should not be used simply as a way to criticize others. Every person experiences moments where their confidence exceeds their knowledge. It is part of being human. The important question is not whether we have blind spots, but whether we remain open to discovering them. Take a moment to reflect on areas where you feel completely certain. Are there subjects where your confidence comes from deep understanding or from limited exposure? What questions might you ask if you assumed there was more to learn? The most valuable mindset may not be believing that we know everything or believing that we know nothing. It is maintaining curiosity while recognizing the limits of our current perspective. True wisdom often begins with a simple realization. The more we learn, the more we understand how much there is still to discover. The Dunning-Kruger effect reveals the relationship between knowledge and confidence, but the mind has another surprising way of protecting itself. Sometimes, instead of admitting uncertainty, we search for evidence that supports what we already believe. In the next chapter, we'll explore the backfire effect, the psychological phenomenon that explains why people sometimes become even more attached to their beliefs when those beliefs are challenged. 28. The backfire effect. Imagine having a conversation with someone about a topic they care deeply about. You calmly present a piece of information that challenges their viewpoint. You provide evidence, explain your reasoning, and expect that the new information might cause them to reconsider. But instead of becoming curious, they become more certain. They defend their original belief even more strongly than before. The information that was meant to change their mind appears to have strengthened their position. This strange reaction is known as the backfire effect. The backfire effect describes the tendency for people, in some situations, to become more committed to their existing beliefs when they encounter information that contradicts them. Instead of simply updating their understanding, they may reject the new information and reinforce the beliefs they already hold. Take a moment to reflect on a time when someone challenged an idea you strongly believed. Notice the immediate emotional reaction that can appear. Before carefully examining the evidence, there may be a feeling of discomfort, resistance, or even defensiveness. Why does this happen? The answer lies in the connection between beliefs and identity. Human beings do not store beliefs as isolated pieces of information. Many beliefs become connected to our experiences, values, communities, and sense of who we are. A challenge to a belief can sometimes feel like a challenge to the self. The mind naturally tries to protect a consistent understanding of reality. When new information creates conflict, the brain experiences a form of psychological tension. This connects closely with cognitive dissonance, where conflicting thoughts create discomfort and motivate us to restore balance. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency has understandable origins. Human beings developed within social groups where shared beliefs helped maintain cooperation and belonging. Being disconnected from a group could carry serious consequences. As a result, the mind became sensitive to information that threatened important social connections or personal identity. However, in today's world, this same protective mechanism can create problems. The backfire effect can make meaningful conversations difficult because people may focus more on defending their position than exploring the truth. When someone feels attacked, even unintentionally, their mind may shift from learning mode into protection mode. This does not mean people are incapable of changing their minds. Humans update their beliefs constantly when new information is presented in ways that feel safe, respectful, and understandable. The approach matters. A conversation built around curiosity often creates a different response than one built around winning. Consider the difference between saying, "You are wrong," and asking, "What led you to this conclusion?" The first statement may create resistance. The second creates an opportunity for exploration. This principle applies not only to disagreements with others, but also to our own internal beliefs. Sometimes we defend ideas about ourselves just as strongly. A person may believe they are not creative, not intelligent, or not capable of change. When evidence challenges those beliefs, the mind may search for reasons to dismiss the evidence. "I was just lucky. It does not count. That was different." These explanations protect the existing story. The challenge is learning to create space between a belief and our identity. A belief is something we hold. It does not have to define who we are. When we separate ourselves from our opinions, changing our minds becomes less threatening. Take a moment to reflect on the beliefs you hold most strongly, not to question them all, but simply to observe them. What evidence would you accept if it challenged your current perspective? Are there ideas you defend because they are true or because they feel connected to who you are? Perhaps intellectual growth is not about having the perfect beliefs. It is about developing the ability to examine them honestly. A flexible mind is not a weak mind. It is a mind capable of adapting. The backfire effect reveals one of the deepest conflicts within human psychology, the desire to discover truth while also protecting the comfort of certainty. But the mind's search for comfort does not only influence our beliefs, it also affects how we imagine the future. Sometimes we underestimate our ability to adapt, believing that future emotions will be far more intense and permanent than they actually become. In the next chapter, we'll explore the impact bias, the psychological tendency that causes us to overestimate how strongly future events will affect our happiness, sadness, and overall emotional state. 29. The impact bias. Imagine receiving news that completely changes your life. Perhaps you achieve a dream you have worked toward for years, or perhaps you experience a major disappointment that feels impossible to overcome. In the moment, the emotion feels enormous. Your mind tells you that this feeling will define your future. If this happens, I will never be the same. If I lose this, I will never recover. These thoughts feel convincing because the present moment is powerful, but something interesting happens with time. The intensity fades. The human mind has a remarkable ability to adjust, adapt, and return to a new emotional balance. This tendency reveals a psychological phenomenon known as the impact bias. The impact bias describes our tendency to overestimate the emotional effect that future events will have on us. We often imagine that positive events will make us happier for longer than they actually do, and we often believe negative events will cause more lasting suffering than they ultimately create. Take a moment to reflect on a past experience you once believed was overwhelming. Perhaps it was a rejection, a failure, an embarrassing moment, or a difficult transition. At the time, the emotion may have felt permanent. It may have seemed impossible to imagine feeling normal again. Yet eventually, life continued. You adapted. The experience became one chapter in a much larger story. This process is known as psychological adaptation, and it is one of the most powerful abilities of the human mind. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability was essential. Humans needed to respond strongly to important events, but they also needed to recover and continue functioning. If every disappointment remained equally painful forever, survival would become extremely difficult. The brain developed mechanisms that allowed emotional experiences to gradually become less intense over time. The same process applies to positive events. A person may imagine that achieving a certain goal will create permanent happiness. They may think, once I reach this point, everything will be perfect. But after achieving the goal, the excitement eventually becomes part of normal life. This does not mean achievements are meaningless. Joy, success, and meaningful experiences are valuable. The interesting point is that humans are constantly adjusting to new circumstances. What once felt extraordinary can eventually become familiar. The impact bias influences many decisions we make. Someone may avoid taking a risk because they overestimate how devastating failure would feel. They may stay in an unfulfilling situation because they imagine change will be unbearable. They may delay pursuing a dream because they believe obstacles will have a permanent emotional impact. At the same time, people may chase certain achievements believing they will provide endless satisfaction. They imagine that a new possession, status, or accomplishment will permanently transform their happiness. When reality becomes more ordinary, they may wonder why the expected feeling did not last. The mind is often inaccurate at predicting its own future emotions. This is because we imagine the future from the emotional state we are currently experiencing. When we are sad, future sadness seems endless. When we are excited, future excitement seems permanent. We project the intensity of the present moment forward, forgetting that our emotions naturally change. Take a moment to reflect on how often your predictions about your own feelings have been completely accurate. How many times have you worried about something that later turned out to be manageable? How many times have you experienced happiness that slowly transformed into a quieter, more stable form? Understanding the impact bias can create a sense of perspective. It reminds us that intense emotions, both positive and negative, are temporary experiences moving through time. Difficult moments deserve attention and care, but they do not always define the future. Likewise, wonderful moments can be appreciated without needing them to last forever. Perhaps one of the most peaceful truths about the human mind is that we are far more adaptable than we often realize. The future version of ourselves is not the same person experiencing this exact moment. They will have new experiences, new perspectives, and new sources of strength. But even as the mind adapts to future events, it also seeks patterns from the past. Sometimes, a single experience can change the way we view ourselves and the world around us. One powerful event can become a turning point, reshaping our identity and guiding future choices. In the final chapter of this journey, we will explore the transformative power of the self-fulfilling prophecy, the psychological phenomenon showing how our expectations can influence our actions and gradually create the reality we experience. 30. The self-fulfilling prophecy. Imagine standing at the beginning of a long path that disappears into the distance. You cannot see exactly where it leads, but before you take the first step, you already have a belief about the journey. Perhaps you believe the path will be difficult. Perhaps you believe you will fail along the way. Or perhaps you believe that, even with obstacles, you are capable of continuing. The interesting question is this: does the belief merely describe the journey, or does it help create it? This question reveals one of the most powerful ideas in psychology, the self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when a belief or expectation influences our behavior in a way that eventually helps create the outcome we originally expected. In simple terms, what we believe about a situation can affect how we act within that situation, and our actions can gradually make that belief appear true. Take a moment to reflect on a time when you expected something to go well or badly. Perhaps you entered a conversation believing it would be uncomfortable. Because of that expectation, you became more nervous, spoke less openly, and interpreted small signs negatively. The interaction then felt awkward, confirming your original belief. The expectation influenced the behavior. The behavior influenced the outcome. The outcome reinforced the expectation. This is the quiet cycle of the self-fulfilling prophecy. The human mind is constantly creating predictions about the world. These predictions help us prepare, make decisions, and navigate uncertainty. However, expectations are not passive thoughts. They influence attention, motivation, confidence, and the choices we make. From an evolutionary perspective, this ability was useful. Anticipating possible outcomes helped humans survive. If someone expected danger, they became more alert. If they expected success from a particular strategy, they were more likely to continue using it. Predictions helped guide behavior. But in modern life, expectations can sometimes become invisible forces shaping our reality. Consider someone who believes they are not good at a particular skill. Because they expect failure, they may avoid practicing, give less effort, or quit quickly when challenges appear. Their lack of progress then seems to prove their original belief: I knew I couldn't do it. But the belief was not simply observing reality. It was influencing it. The same process can work in a positive direction. Someone who believes improvement is possible may approach challenges differently. They may practice longer, seek feedback, and remain persistent when difficulties appear. Their expectation creates behaviors that increase the possibility of success. This does not mean that positive thinking alone guarantees every outcome. Reality contains many factors beyond belief. Skills, resources, circumstances, and opportunities all matter. A person cannot simply imagine an outcome and expect the universe to provide it. The deeper lesson is that beliefs influence the actions that shape outcomes. The self-fulfilling prophecy also appears in relationships. If we assume someone dislikes us, we may become distant, defensive, or uncomfortable around them. They may respond to our behavior by becoming more distant themselves, creating the exact situation we feared. On the other hand, approaching someone with openness and trust can encourage a warmer response. Our expectations often become part of the environment we create. Take a moment to reflect on the expectations you carry about yourself. What stories have you repeated about your abilities, your personality, or your future? Which beliefs encourage growth, and which ones quietly place limits on what you attempt? Throughout this journey, we have explored many hidden forces that influence human behavior. We discovered that the mind creates shortcuts, protects beliefs, responds to expectations, and constantly interprets the world around us. We learn that our perception of reality is shaped not only by what happens, but by the meanings we attach to what happens. Perhaps the greatest psychological insight is that the mind is not simply a mirror reflecting reality. It is also a participant in creating our experience of it. Every expectation is a beginning. Every belief is a direction. Every action is a vote for the person we are becoming. The psychology of the human mind is filled with paradoxes. We seek truth, but sometimes protect illusions. We desire connection, but fear vulnerability. We want change, but often resist uncertainty. Yet within these contradictions exists something remarkable, the ability to become aware, adapt, and grow. Take a moment to reflect on everything explored throughout these 30 hidden psychology principles. The goal is not to control every thought or predict every behavior. The goal is simply to understand the invisible patterns that influence our lives. Because when we understand the mind, we gain the ability to choose more consciously. And perhaps that is the most powerful psychological insight of all. The mind shapes our world, but awareness gives us the opportunity to shape the mind.